They called him the king of the underworld. 3 cities bent to his name. Men who had killed for less than a wrong glance stood when Dominic Falcone walked into a room. He had a wife at home, pretty, quiet, the kind of woman you put in a glass case and forget about. That was his first mistake. His second was walking into a room full of the most dangerous men in the hemisphere, expecting to run it. The third was not recognizing the woman already sitting at the head of the table. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button, and in the comments, tell me the name of the city you're watching from right now so I can see how far this story has traveled. Trust me, you're going to want to be here when those doors open. The rain had been falling over the city for 3 days straight, the kind of rain that didn't so much come down as settle in, soaking into the bones of the buildings and the people inside them. From the 42nd floor of the Falcone Tower, the streets below looked like black veins running through wet concrete, pulsing with headlights and umbrellas and small, ordinary lives. Dominic Falcone stood at the window in a charcoal suit that had been cut for him in Milan 6 weeks earlier, a glass of bourbon in his left hand, untouched. He was not a tall man, but people always remembered him as taller than he was. It was the way he held himself. Shoulders square, chin level, eyes that didn't blink when they should have. At 43, he had the face of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. Behind him, the penthouse was quiet. Not empty, never empty. There were always people in the Falcone penthouse. 2 men at the service elevator, 1 at the private entrance, a driver waiting downstairs who hadn't turned his engine off in 6 hours, a housekeeper named Regina, who had been with the family since Dominic was 11 years old and who still crossed herself when she walked past his office. But the kind of quiet Dominic was standing in now was the particular quiet of a house where a marriage had gone cold. He heard her before he saw her, the soft click of heels against the dark walnut floor, measured, unhurried. Aria Falcone never moved like she was going somewhere. She moved like she had already arrived and was simply taking her time letting you know. "You didn't come to bed," she said. Dominic didn't turn around. "Meeting at 8. It's 6:15. I know what time it is." There was a pause. In the reflection of the window, he could see her standing by the kitchen island in a cream-colored silk robe, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, a cup of coffee in her hands. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at a stack of papers on the counter that he hadn't noticed before. "You've got the Vitale thing today," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Big one." "Biggest." She made a soft sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything. She set the cup down. "You should eat something." "I'm not hungry." "You're never hungry before a meeting. One day you're going to pass out in front of a man who's trying to kill you, and then where will we be?" He turned around then. Finally. Aria was 38 years old and still, at certain angles, looked like the girl he had met at a wedding in New Haven 16 years ago, the one with the careful eyes and the quiet mouth who had turned down his first 3 attempts at conversation before finally agreeing to let him buy her a drink. She had been in law school then, top of her class. He remembered that because it had impressed him, and almost nothing impressed him, even at 27. "You're up early," he said. "I had a call. At 6. With London, it's 11 there." He nodded slowly like a man who was processing the information and also like a man who had stopped listening 3 words in. "What are you doing talking to London?" he asked, more out of habit than curiosity. Aria looked up at him. For a half-second, something passed behind her eyes. Something sharp and fast and gone before he could name it. Then she smiled the small, tired smile she had been wearing for years. "Just an old friend from school," she said. "Her husband died. We were catching up." He turned back to the window. That was the end of the conversation. It was, he would think about later, the last time in his life he would ever underestimate the woman in the cream-colored silk robe standing in his kitchen. But he didn't know that yet. At 7:15, Marco Battaglia stepped off the service elevator and was patted down by 2 men who had known him since he was 18 and still patted him down every time. Because that was the way the Falcones did things. Marco didn't complain. Marco never complained. He was 31 years old, built like a refrigerator, and had the kind of loyalty that was bred into a person over generations, the way some families bred horses or hatred. "He up?" Marco asked. "Been up," one of the men said. "Since 4. Marco made a face. "Jesus. Big day." "Yeah." Marco walked through the foyer into the main room. Dominic was sitting now at the long glass table near the window, a leather folder open in front of him, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He only wore them in private. Marco was one of maybe 4 people in the world who had ever seen Dominic Falcone in reading glasses, and he had been careful never to mention this to anyone. Boss? Marco? Cars are downstairs. Sal's driving. Theo's in the follow. We got Ricci and the kid in the third. The kid's name is Elena. Yeah, I know her name. Use it. Yes, boss. Dominic closed the folder, took off the glasses, folded them, slid them into the breast pocket of his suit. Every motion small and deliberate, like a man closing up a shop at the end of a long day. She ready? Elena? Yeah, she's downstairs. Been here since 6:30. How does she look? Marco considered the question. Sharp. Scared? A little. Good. Marco hesitated. He had worked for Dominic for 12 years, and in that time he had learned when to speak and when not to. This was a when-to moment. Boss? About the kid, Elena. You sure about her? Dominic looked up, not angry, just curious. You have a problem with her? No, no problem. She's smart. She's ambitious. She reads a room. It's just what? Vitaly is going to ask why she's there. He's going to want to know who she is. He's going to wonder if she's, if she's something to you. Let him wonder. Dominic. Marco. There was a silence. Marco shifted his weight from one foot to the other. It's Mrs. Falcone I'm thinking about, Marco said finally, quieter than before. That's all I'm saying. Dominic looked at him for a long time. His face didn't change, it almost never did. But there was something in his eyes, something tired maybe, or something that had stopped caring to explain itself a long time ago. My wife, he said, does not concern herself with my business. Yes, boss. She never has. Yes, boss. And Elena is a protege, nothing more. Yes, boss. Marco did not say what he was thinking, which was that he had been a married man for 9 years, and that he had learned one thing in those 9 years, which was that a wife who seemed to not concern herself with your business was not the same as a wife who did not concern herself with your business. But he was not paid to educate Dominic Falcone on the nature of marriage. He was paid to drive him to meetings and make sure he came home alive. So he said, cars are downstairs, again, and he walked out. Dominic sat at the table for another minute after Marco left. He was looking at nothing in particular. His hand rested on the closed leather folder. Somewhere in the apartment, he could hear the soft clatter of Regina in the kitchen, the rustle of Aria moving through the back hallway, the hum of the city 42 floors below. He stood up, straightened his tie, buttoned his jacket, walked to the front door. In the foyer, Aria was waiting for him. She had changed out of the robe. She was wearing a black cashmere sweater and dark jeans and no makeup, and she looked for a moment like the girl from the wedding in New Haven. She was holding his overcoat. You're going to need this, she said. It's still raining. He took the coat. He didn't put it on. Thanks. Dominic. Yeah. She hesitated. This was not a thing Aria Falcone did often. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Be careful today. He smiled, barely. It was the kind of smile a man gives a child who has asked him a question he finds sweet and slightly irritating. I'm always careful. I know you are. She stopped. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted. The old quiet came back. The door closed behind her eyes. Just be careful. Okay, baby. He leaned in. He kissed her on the forehead. It was a thing he had done 1,000 times. It meant nothing anymore, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. I'll be home by 10, he said. Sure. He stepped into the private elevator. The doors closed. She stood in the foyer for a long time, his overcoat still folded over her arm, her face empty of everything. Then she walked to the window and watched the black car pull out from under the awning and disappear into the rain. When she turned around, her phone was in her hand. She typed one word, moving, and she hit send. Elena Marchetti was 26 years old, and she had been waiting for this morning her entire life. She sat in the back of the third car, a black SUV, tinted windows, the smell of new leather and old cologne. With her knees pressed together and her hands folded in her lap and her spine straight as a chalk line. Because her grandmother had told her when she was 9 years old that the difference between a woman who was taken seriously and a woman who was not was 6 inches of spine, and Elena had never forgotten it. She was not a beautiful woman in the way magazines defined beauty. Her nose was slightly too strong for her face. Her mouth was wide and serious. Her eyes were the color of wet slate. She had the kind of looks that grew on people the longer they looked. And she had learned early that this was a better kind of beauty than the other because it gave her time. Today, she was wearing a navy suit. No jewelry. Her hair pulled back in a low knot. A gold pen in her breast pocket that had belonged to her father, who had been a mid-level bookie in the outer boroughs, and who had died in a hospital bed 3 years ago with $11,000 in the bank, and a daughter who had sworn, standing over him, that she would never die with only $11,000 in the bank. Dominic Falcone had found her 2 years ago at a courthouse, where she had been clerking for a judge who was on the Falcone payroll but didn't know it. Dominic had watched her argue a procedural motion in a preliminary hearing for 12 minutes and had, afterward, sent a car for her. She had gotten in the car. That was how it worked. 2 years later, she was sitting in the third SUV of a 3-car motorcade, and today she was going to walk into the biggest meeting of her life and sit at Dominic Falcone's right hand. The driver's name was Ricci. He was a man of few words, which suited Elena, who was thinking. "Nervous?" he asked, finally, as they pulled onto the expressway. "No." "Good." "A little." He smiled at her in the rear view. "Better." She looked out the window. The rain streaked the glass. "Mr. Falcone is a good man," Ricci said, which was a thing people who worked for Mr. Falcone said a lot, and which she had never quite believed, because she had never quite believed that any man could be described in 2 words. "He takes care of his people." "I know. But you watch him today." She looked at Ricci in the mirror. "What do you mean?" "I mean you watch him. Not the men he's meeting with. Him. You learn more in 10 minutes watching him work a room than you'll learn in 10 years reading books about it." Elena nodded slowly. "Okay. And if something goes sideways, is something going to go sideways?" Ricci was quiet for a moment. "Something always goes sideways," he said. "Mr. Falcone just knows how to walk out still standing." She turned back to the window. The rain, the gray morning, the long straight road out of the city. She had not told anyone, not her mother, not her sister, not the girl she sometimes slept with on Sunday nights, that she had been approached 6 months ago by a woman she did not know, at a coffee shop near the courthouse. The woman had been well-dressed, dark-haired, with the kind of calm that made people behave well around her without knowing why. The woman had not given her name. She had said only that she had been watching Elena's work for some time, and that she believed Elena had more potential than Dominic Falcone had given her credit for. Then she had slid an envelope across the table and said, "If you ever get tired of being someone's protege, call this number." Elena had not called the number. She had not opened the envelope. It sat, still sealed, in the back of a drawer in her apartment on East 74th Street, and she had not thought about it in 3 weeks, until this morning, putting on her navy suit in front of the bathroom mirror, she had caught her own eyes and thought, for no reason she could name, about the woman in the coffee shop and the envelope in the drawer, and the quiet, steady way the woman had said, "More potential than Dominic Falcone has given you credit for." The motorcade turned off the expressway. Elena Marchetti straightened her spine another inch. The meeting was being held at a private club in the old garment district. A 6-story limestone building with no sign on the door, a doorman in a long coat, and a history that included at least 2 Supreme Court justices, 1 ex-president, and a Kennedy. On the 4th floor, there was a library with green leather chairs and a fireplace, and on the 5th floor, there was a dining room, and on the 6th floor, there was a room called the Oak Room, which had no windows and no telephones and no record of ever having been used for anything, because the sort of people who used the Oak Room did not leave records. Dominic Falcone walked into the lobby at 7:53. Marco was behind him. 2 men from the club took his coat. A third, a stooped elderly man named Albert, who had worked there for 51 years, nodded to him silently and led the way to the elevator. They did not speak in the elevator. On the 6th floor, the doors opened and Albert gestured down a long, dark hallway hung with portraits of men whose names had been important 100 years ago and were now forgotten by almost everyone. Dominic Falcone walked that hallway the way a man walks the aisle of a church he grew up in. He knew every step. He knew the turn. He knew the sound the door handle would make when his hand closed on it. He turned that handle now. He pushed the door open, and for the first time in 20 years, for the first time since his father had died and left him this life, Dominic Falcone stopped walking, because the oak room was full of men he had been expecting. Vitale from Milan, the Greek, the two Russians, the man from Montreal who no one had ever heard speak in anything but French, and who, as far as anyone knew, was named only Bernard. But at the head of the table, in the chair Dominic had assumed without question would be his, sat a woman. Her hair was pulled back. She was wearing a black suit. She was not smiling. She looked up when he walked in. Their eyes met. For a long second, Dominic Falcone did not move. He did not breathe. He did not speak. In the whole long catalog of his life, the men he had killed, the women he had loved, the fathers he had buried, he could not remember a moment when his body had so completely refused to listen to him. Because the woman at the head of the table was his wife. But he couldn't know that yet. Not quite. Not in the way that he would know it later, when everything he thought he understood about the last 16 years of his life came apart in his hands like wet paper. Right now, in this first long second, his brain was still trying to do the math. Arya, in the oak room, in the chair, in that suit. With those eyes he had never seen before, eyes that did not belong to the woman in the cream-colored robe. The door closed behind him. Marco, standing at his shoulder, made a small sound in his throat. Not a word, just a sound. The sound a man makes when he realizes he has walked into a room that does not contain the meaning he thought it would contain. No one else in the room spoke. Vitale, at Arya's right hand, was watching Dominic with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had come to see a show and was not yet sure what sort of show it would be. The Greek was smoking. Bernard was not looking at Dominic at all. The Russians had their hands folded on the table, and Arya was looking at her husband with an expression he had never seen on her face before, in 16 years. She was looking at him the way a chess player looks at a board. "Dominic," she said quietly, "please, sit down. We've been waiting for you." He sat. He couldn't later remember walking to the chair. He couldn't remember pulling it out. He could only remember that suddenly he was sitting halfway down the table in a chair that had been left empty for him, and that Marco was standing behind him, and that Elena Marchetti had come in somewhere behind Marco and was now standing against the wall with her hands folded in front of her and her slate-colored eyes moving very, very slowly around the room, taking everything in, missing nothing. Dominic cleared his throat. "Arya." It came out wrong. It came out small. He heard it, and he hated it, and he tried again. "What is this?" She smiled at him. Not cruelly, not even unkindly. It was the smile of a woman who had rehearsed this moment so many times in so many dark rooms that by the time she finally arrived at it, it had become a kind of peace. "This is the meeting," she said, "the one you came here for." "This is not—" "It is, though." She folded her hands. "I know you're confused. I understand. Take a moment. Drink some water. We have time." He did not take a moment. "Somebody tell me what is happening," he said, and his voice was low now, and the room was very still, and every man at the table heard the edge come into him and did not move. Vitale spoke. Vitale was 64 years old. He had been running the Milan branch of his family's business since he was 31. He had outlived 3 wives and 4 rivals, and he had a face like a walnut and a voice like gravel being dragged across a floor. "Dominic," Vitale said, in English that was better than Dominic's own. "Please, don't be foolish. Your wife has been speaking with us for— How long now, signora?" 2 years, Arya said. 2 years, Vitale repeated. 2 years she has been speaking with us. Not in secret, in conversation. She came to me first, at a funeral in Naples. She told me she had ideas. I listened, because her ideas were good, because she had done her homework, because Dominic, she understood things about this business that— He spread his hands. "Forgive me. Things that you have stopped understanding." "My wife," Dominic said, very slowly, "has not been to Naples in—" "She went in October," Arya said. I told you I was visiting my cousin in Boston. He stared at her. I did not have a cousin in Boston, she said. I have never had a cousin in Boston. A silence. You flew to Naples, Dominic said, to meet with… Yes. Without telling me. Yes. For 2 years. Yes. Arya. Dominic. What are you doing? She was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her hands. Then she looked back up at him. And when she spoke, her voice was different. It was not the voice of the woman in the oak room. It was the voice of the woman in the kitchen that morning. It was softer. It had something in it he had not heard in a very long time. And when he heard it, something behind his sternum did a small, unwelcome thing. I'm saving your life, she said. Oh. He laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out of him before he could stop it. A short, ugly sound. You're saving my life. Yes. I have 40 men downstairs, Arya. I have a city. You have 3 months, she said. The laugh died. What? You have 3 months, Dominic. Maybe 4. Before the commission votes against you. Before the Bratva walks out of the Brighton deal. Before Vitale, gently across the table, pulls his family out of the Atlantic corridor. And before the Greek does the same. And before the entire structure you have spent 20 years building collapses underneath you because you have not been paying attention. And because the men around you are too frightened of you to tell you that you have not been paying attention. He stared at her. That's not… Ask Marco. Marco, behind him, went very still. Ask Marco, Arya said again, quietly. Ask him how many meetings he's been in this year where people have asked, quietly, whether the Falcone operation is still what it was. Ask him how many times he's come home and told his wife that he's worried. He is worried, Dominic. He loves you. He would die for you. And he is worried. Dominic did not turn around to look at Marco. He did not need to. He could feel Marco not breathing. How do you know that? He said very quietly to his wife. How do you know what Marco says to his wife? Because Marco's wife is my friend, Arya said. She has been my friend for 11 years. You have met her 6 times. You could not pick her out of a lineup. Her name is Teresa. She has 2 daughters. The oldest one is named for me. You did not know that. He closed his eyes. Dominic. He opened them. I am not your enemy, she said. I have never in my life been your enemy. I was your wife. I was your wife when you asked me to stop practicing law because it embarrassed you. I was your wife when you asked me to stop going to dinners with my friends because you did not trust them. I was your wife when you forgot my birthday 4 years in a row, and when you forgot our anniversary, and when you stopped coming to bed. I was your wife when my father died, and you sent flowers from the office instead of coming to the funeral. I have been your wife for 16 years, Dominic Falcone, and I have loved you, and I am still, for reasons that are my own, trying to save your life. The room did not move. Dominic did not look at Vitale. He did not look at the Greek. He did not look at Bernard or at the Russians or at Elena Marchetti standing against the wall with her hands folded and her eyes on the floor. He looked at his wife. Then why here? He said finally. Why here? Why like this? Why in front of… He gestured loosely, vaguely. All of them. She took a long breath. Because, she said, if I had told you in the kitchen this morning, you would not have listened. You would have patted me on the head and you would have gone to your meeting and you would have died. You would have gone to Atlanta next month and you would have walked into a room and you would not have walked out because the people in that room have already decided. I know because they told me. I know because they told me first, Dominic, before they told anyone. Because they wanted to know if I would stand in their way. And you told them, I told them I wanted to speak first. He was silent for a very long time. Elena Marchetti, against the wall, had not moved, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, her gaze had lifted from the floor and was now resting on Arya Falcone. The look on Elena's face was not the look of a woman who was surprised. It was the look of a woman who was finally seeing something she had been looking for a very long time. Dominic saw it. He saw it and he understood. And something in his chest, something very old, something he had inherited from his father and his father's father, went cold. You too, he said to Elena. Elena did not answer. Elena. Mr. Falcone. Say it. Elena looked at Arya. Arya nodded, once. Yes, sir, Elena said quietly. Me too. Yeah. Dominic Falcone sat in that chair, in the oak room, on the 6th floor of a building with no sign on the door, and for the first time in his adult life, he did not know where he was. He was not a stupid man. He had never been a stupid man. He had survived 20 years in a business that ate stupid men alive, and he had done it because he could see the shape of a thing 10 moves before it happened. He could read a room the way other men read a book. He could tell when a man was lying to him by the way his shoulders sat in his chair. And he had sat across a kitchen table from Arya Vale for 16 years and had seen nothing. She had not lied. That was the worst of it. She had not lied once. She had simply gone quiet, and he had mistaken her quiet for emptiness because he had never thought to ask what was inside. He was not angry. He wanted to be angry. He wanted the anger very badly because the anger would be clean and familiar, and he would know what to do with it. But the anger would not come. What came instead was something else, something softer and more terrible, something that felt a little like grief, and a little like the long, slow surrender of a very old argument he had not known he was having with himself. Vitale, he said, finally, without taking his eyes off his wife. Yes, Dominic. Has she made you an offer? She has. Is it a good offer? Vitale considered the question. Dominic, Vitale said, in 33 years in this business, it is the best offer I have ever been made. Dominic nodded slowly. Greek. Yes. You. Yes. Bernard. We. Okay, Dominic said softly. Okay. He sat back in his chair. He looked down at his hands. They were resting on the table. They were the same hands they had always been. He had a scar across the base of the left thumb from when he was 19, and had been stupid once, for about 4 minutes, and had nearly lost the thumb entirely. His wedding ring was on the 4th finger. He had not taken it off in 16 years. He looked at it now and he felt, very distinctly, for just a moment, the small warm pressure of Arya's forehead against his lips that morning, when he had leaned down and kissed her without thinking, the way a man kisses something he is leaving. He looked up. I'm listening, he said. Arya did not smile. She did not react. She simply nodded once, like a woman at the head of a long table who had just secured the first vote. Thank you, she said. And then, in a different voice, a voice he did not recognize, a voice that belonged to the chair she was sitting in and not to the kitchen in the apartment 42 floors above the wet black veins of the city, she said, Let's begin. Outside, the rain kept falling. Down on the street, Sal sat in the first car with the engine running. Down in the lobby, Albert stood at his post, his hands folded behind his back. Somewhere in an apartment in Queens, a woman named Teresa Battaglia looked at her phone, saw a message that said, Only it's happening, and put the phone face down on her kitchen counter and said a prayer that was not quite a prayer for a friend she had loved for 11 years. And in the oak room, at the head of the table, Arya Falcone, who had once been Arya Vale, top of her class at Columbia Law, who had given up a clerkship with a federal judge because a man she loved had asked her to, who had spent 16 years being invisible in her own house, opened a leather folder that was identical to the one her husband had closed in his penthouse that morning. She opened it, and she began to speak. And Dominic Falcone, for the first time in his life, listened to his wife. She began with a map. It was not a large map. It was the size of a dinner plate, printed on heavy cream-colored paper, and she slid it across the table in Dominic's direction without a word. Vitale watched it travel. The Greek watched it travel. Bernard did not look up, because Bernard had already seen the map. Dominic looked down at it. It was a map of the eastern seaboard, from Portland down through Miami, with small red circles drawn in ink at 11 specific locations. He recognized all 11. 3 of them were his. 2 were Vitale's. One belonged to a family in Philadelphia that had been at war with the Falcones, quietly and expensively, for almost 9 years. One was in Baltimore. One was in a marina outside Savannah that Dominic had personally overseen the acquisition of, through 4 shell companies in 2021, and that was not supposed to exist on any piece of paper anywhere in the world. He stared at that circle for a long time. Where did you get this? he said. Arya did not answer. He looked up. Arya, where did you get this? The same place, she said quietly, that the commission got it. His jaw tightened. Someone is selling me. Someone has been selling you for 1.5 years. Who? She hesitated. Arya. Who? I'll tell you, she said. When we're done here. I'll tell you everything, but not in this room. Tell me now. No. The word landed flat on the table. It was not sharp. It was not loud. It was the no of a woman who had spent 2 years preparing for every single way that this morning could go, and who had already decided long before he had walked through the door exactly which question she would answer and which she would not. He heard it, and for the second time in 10 minutes he understood something about his wife that he had not understood before, which was that she was not improvising. She had not been improvising in a very long time. He nodded once, slowly. Okay. She looked down at the map. These 11 locations, she said, are the places where your operation is weakest. Not because your men are weak. Your men are very good. Your men are in fact better than you have any right to expect, considering the way you have been running things for the last 4 years. The locations are weak because you have been pulling resources out of the periphery and concentrating them in the center. You have been preparing for a war you think is coming from the outside. It's not. She let that sit for a moment. It's coming from the inside, she said. It has been for a while. And the reason you haven't seen it is because the person running it is someone you stopped looking at a long time ago. Dominic's hands flattened on the table. Arya. Not in this room. Arya, if somebody inside my house is moving against me, I have the right to... You have the right, she said, and now her voice was just a little harder, just a hair's width harder, and Vitale looked down at the table to hide a small private smile. To make one good decision in the next 10 minutes. If you make it, I will tell you everything at home tonight. If you do not, I will not, and you will be dead inside 90 days. Those are the options. They are the only options. There is no third one. Please stop asking me for a third one. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long, long time. The Russian on the far left of the table, the younger one, with the blonde crew cut and the heavy brow, reached for a cigarette. He did not light it. He simply held it between his fingers and waited, because he had been in many rooms in many cities, and he had learned to recognize the particular quiet that came before a man either broke or did not. Dominic Falcone did not break. He breathed in once, slowly. He breathed out. He picked up the map. He folded it carefully in half, then in quarters, and he slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, not because he wanted to keep it, because he wanted to do something with his hands that was not putting them around someone's throat. All right, he said. Tell me what I'm hearing today. Arya's shoulders dropped, almost imperceptibly. If anyone at the table noticed, it was only Vitale, who had been married 3 times and who had learned late in life to watch a woman's shoulders rather than her face. You're hearing a new structure, she said. That's all. A new structure for the next 20 years. One that you can be the head of, or one that you can be a partner in, but one that you are not going to be left out of, because I will not allow it. You will not allow it. No. Arya, you are still my husband, Dominic. I did not come here to take your life away from you. I came here to save it. I've been telling you this since you walked in, and I'm going to keep telling you until you believe me. He was quiet. Okay, he said, finally. Okay, walk me through it. And she did. For the next 40 minutes, Arya Falcone walked 7 of the most dangerous men in the Atlantic Theater through a plan that she had been building, in private, for almost 2.5 years. She did it in the same quiet, even voice she had used that morning to tell him it was still raining outside. She did not raise her voice once. She did not check her notes more than twice. She named numbers from memory. Revenue projections, loss margins, the exact percentages by which 3 separate shipping routes had become unprofitable in the last 14 months because of decisions Dominic had personally approved without reading the underlying analysis. She named cities. She named names. She named 2 people in the Falcone organization whom Dominic had trusted with his life, and she named what they had been paid, and by whom, to stop being trustworthy. Dominic did not interrupt her. Not once. He sat in the chair he had been given halfway down the table, and he listened to his wife dismantle, in cold, quiet detail, a version of himself that he had not realized was already dying. It was not the content that undid him. It was the fluency. Every sentence she spoke was a sentence she had said before, in her head, 1,000 times. She knew where the pauses went. She knew which names to pronounce in Italian and which to pronounce in English. She knew when to look at Vitale and when to look at the Greek. And she knew, and this was the thing that hurt the most, in a way he would not understand for another 6 hours, when not to look at Dominic at all. Marco, standing behind him, had not moved in almost an hour. Somewhere around the 20-minute mark, Dominic had realized that Marco was no longer breathing like a bodyguard. He was breathing like a man at a funeral. When Arya finally stopped, the room was very still. Vitale was the first to speak. Dominic. Yeah. I want you to understand something. Go ahead. Vitale leaned forward. He was not a large man, Vitale, but he had a way of leaning that made the table feel smaller. 2 years ago, he said, your wife came to me in Naples. I did not know her. I had met her perhaps once at a christening. I remembered her as a quiet woman. Very pretty. A lawyer, someone told me, but no longer. She came to my hotel alone. No driver. No security. She sat down across from me in the lobby, and she ordered a coffee, and she said to me in Italian, her Italian, Dominic, is better than yours. She said to me, Signor Vitale, my husband is going to get himself killed, and when he does, a great many of us are going to lose a great deal of money. I would like to prevent this from happening. I would like you to listen to me. I'm sorry, Vitale paused. I listened to her out of courtesy, he said. I listened to her for 19 minutes. At the end of the 19 minutes, I offered her a position in my own family. She declined. She said she was not interested in a position. She said she was interested in her husband, and in what was left of her husband's name, and in what she could build from those two things if she was given time. Vitale looked at Arya. She has had time, he said. She has used it very well. Dominic said nothing. I tell you this, Vitale continued, not to humiliate you. I have too much respect for your father's memory to humiliate you, Dominic. I tell you this because I want you to understand that what is happening in this room is not a betrayal. Your wife has not betrayed you. She has, in fact, done the opposite. She has protected you from a betrayal that was being prepared against you by other people, while you were busy. He waved a hand vaguely, the way an old man waves at a fly, being Dominic Falcone. Dominic's jaw worked. And I should thank her for this, he said. You should, Vitale said. Eventually. Yes, but not today. Today is not for thanking. Today is for deciding. Deciding what? Whether you are a man, Vitale said, or a child. The Greek laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, and he covered it with his hand, but it was a laugh. The Russians did not laugh. Bernard looked for the first time in the meeting directly at Dominic, and his eyes were not unkind, but they were not warm either, and Dominic understood that Bernard was the one who had not yet decided, and that Bernard's vote, whenever it came, would matter. Dominic looked at Arya. She was looking at her hands. I need a minute, he said. Vitale nodded. Of course. Alone. Arya looked up. With my wife, Dominic said. 5 minutes. Then we come back. Then we finish this. There was a pause. Arya considered him. She considered him the way a woman considers a man she has been married to for 16 years and is no longer entirely sure she knows. All right, she said finally. 5 minutes. She rose from the chair at the head of the table. She did it without any of the theater a lesser person would have put into it. She simply stood, picked up the leather folder, and walked around the table toward a narrow door at the back of the room that Dominic had not previously noticed. She opened the door. She did not hold it for him. He followed her. Marco started to follow him. Dominic stopped him with a hand on his chest. Stay. Boss? Stay. Marco stayed. The door closed behind them. The room Arya led him into was small, wood-paneled, with a single window that looked out at a brick wall 3 feet away. There was a small writing desk, 2 chairs, and a framed photograph of a man in a 19th century military uniform whom neither of them recognized. Arya set the folder on the desk. She did not sit down. Dominic closed the door behind him. They stood there looking at each other for what felt like a very long time. "Say it," he said, finally. "Say what?" "Whatever you're going to say." "I've already said it, Dominic." "No. Out there you said things. To them. To—" He gestured loosely at the wall. "To the room. I want the things you haven't said. I want the things you've been carrying around for 2 years. I want to hear them now." She looked at him. "You're sure?" "Yes." "No, you're not." "Arya, you don't want to hear them, Dominic. You want to survive them. Those are two different things." "Then let me survive them." She was quiet. She walked to the window. She looked out at the brick wall. She crossed her arms against her chest, and for a second, just a second, she was not the woman at the head of the table. She was a woman standing in a small wood-paneled room, trying to figure out how to tell her husband something that had been sitting on her chest like a bag of wet sand for almost a decade. "You don't see me anymore," she said. Her voice was quiet. It had almost nothing in it. "I know you don't. I don't think you've seen me in, I don't even know, 5 years, 6, maybe longer. It happened so slowly I didn't notice at first. I'd try to tell you things about my day and you'd nod, and then 30 seconds later you'd ask me a question that you could only have asked if you hadn't been listening to a word I just said. And I told myself, he's tired, he's busy, he's got things on his mind. I told myself that for a very long time, Dominic." She laughed once without any humor in it. "My father got sick in 2021, you remember." "Arya, you remember?" "I remember. I called you from the hospital. I was sitting in a hallway in Baltimore with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hand, and the doctor had just told me that my father had maybe 3 weeks, and I called you. I called you at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Do you remember what you said?" He didn't. He wanted to say that he did. He wanted to say that he remembered every second of that call, because to not remember would be unforgivable. And he had been forgiven for a great many things in his life, but he did not think he could be forgiven for this. He didn't remember. "You said," she said very softly, "Baby, I'm in a thing. Can I call you back?" He closed his eyes. "And you didn't call back," she said. "Not that day, not the next day. You called back 3 days later, and when you did, you didn't ask about my father. You asked me whether I had picked up your suit from the tailor. Arya, I am not telling you this to hurt you. I know. I am telling you this because you asked me what I have been carrying around for 2 years, and the answer is that I have been carrying around you, Dominic. I've been carrying around the version of you that used to listen when I spoke, the version of you that used to come to bed, the version that I married. I've been carrying him around inside me like a dead child, and I did not know what to do with him, and so I went to work. That's what I did. I went to work, because the only thing I have ever been good at, other than loving you, is work." He opened his eyes. She was not crying. He had expected her to be crying. She was not. She was standing very still at the window with her arms folded, and her face was the face of a woman who had done her crying. All of it, several years ago, in rooms where he had not been. "I did not set out to do this," she said. "I want you to understand that. I did not sit down one day and decide to go behind your back. What happened was that I started making calls. Just calls. I called old friends. I called people I had gone to law school with. I called a woman I'd met at a charity dinner in 2019 who turned out to know Vitaly's daughter. I made calls because my husband didn't talk to me anymore, and I was 36 years old. And I was not going to spend the rest of my life sitting in a penthouse waiting for you to come home from somewhere you never actually told me you had been. Arya." One call led to another. One meeting led to another. By the time I realized I had become something, she gestured vaguely at herself. This. By the time I realized I had become this, Dominic, I had also started to hear things. About you, about the business. And the things I was hearing were bad. They were very bad. And I had to make a choice. What choice? Whether to tell you. He waited. "I didn't tell you, she said. "Obviously, and I want you to know why. It wasn't because I wanted to outgrow you. It wasn't because I wanted to. I don't know. Run your life. It was because I knew, Dominic. I knew what you would do if I told you. I knew exactly what you would do. You would have gone out and you would have killed 3 or 4 people very quickly, without thinking. And all of those people would have been the wrong people, because the right people were smarter than you were giving them credit for. And you would have tripped every wire they had set for you, and you would be dead already. I am not speaking in metaphors. You would be dead. I would be a widow. So I did not tell you. I went to Vitali instead. I went to the Greek. I went to Bernard. I built a room around you that you could step into when the time came, and I kept building it, and I kept building it, and I kept building it for 2 years while you— She stopped. While I what? He said quietly. While you slept with Elena Marchetti. The room went very still. Dominic did not move. I didn't— Don't. Aria. Don't, Dominic. Don't stand in this room and lie to me. Not today. Not after everything else. I have earned better than that from you today, if I have ever earned anything. He was quiet for a long moment. Twice, he said finally. It was twice, 6 months ago. It wasn't— I don't care. It wasn't anything. I don't care, Dominic. I don't care. Do you understand me? I stopped caring about that particular thing almost a year ago. What I care about is the fact that you brought her today, to this meeting, to sit at your right hand, in front of the commission, while your wife was sitting at home pretending to make phone calls to London. That is what I care about, not the sleeping, the arrogance. He looked at the floor. He understood in that moment that he was not going to survive this morning by being angry, or by being proud, or by being the Dominic Falcone who had walked out of the penthouse at 7:15. That man was not in this room. That man had not, in fact, been in this room when he walked in. That man had been gone for a long time. And Dominic had not noticed, because nobody in Dominic's life had, until this morning, been willing to tell him. He sat down in one of the chairs, put his elbows on his knees, and he put his face in his hands, and for the first time in perhaps 20 years, since a hospital room at the end of his father's life, the smell of bleach and flowers and the slow clicking of a morphine drip, Dominic Falcone was, for a moment, simply a man. Aria did not go to him. That was perhaps the important thing. A lesser woman, or a more forgiving one, or one who had not spent 2 years becoming the person she was becoming, would have gone to him, would have put a hand on his shoulder, would have leaned down and let him put his face against her stomach and breathe. Aria did not. Aria stood at the window, her arms folded, and she waited. He came back to himself after a minute or so. He wiped his face, though there was nothing on it. He sat up. He straightened his tie out of habit, because he had been straightening his tie before he walked into rooms since he was 18 years old. Okay, he said. Okay? Okay. She looked at him. Okay, what, Dominic? You tell me, he said. You're the one who built the room. And she almost smiled. It was not a smile of triumph. It was not even really a smile of affection. It was the small, tired smile of a woman who had spent 2 years waiting to hear her husband say a sentence of that shape, and who was, at 40 years old, too honest a person to pretend she did not feel something when he finally said it. Come back in with me, she said. We finish. We go home. We talk. Tonight. The whole thing. Everything you want to know, I tell you. Everything I want to tell you, I tell you. We do it in the kitchen. We do it over a bottle of the red you like. And we do it with our phones in a drawer, and we do it like adults. And then tomorrow we figure out who is killing you. He looked up. Who is it, Aria? Tonight. Tonight, Dominic. I gave you my word, and I gave you my terms. One good decision in the next 10 minutes. Make it. He stood up. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the handle. He stopped. He turned back to her. Aria. Yes. I'm sorry. She breathed in slowly. I know, she said. Open the door. He opened the door. They walked back into the oak room in a silence that was not the silence they had left with. Vitali saw it first. Of course he did. Vitali saw everything first. He watched Dominic cross the room to the chair he had been given, and he watched Aria walk back to the head of the table, and he watched them sit down without looking at each other. And he knew, in the particular way that old men in this business knew things, that the morning had tipped. That whatever Aria Falcone had come into the oak room hoping to accomplish, she had accomplished. That the question of whether the Falcone name would continue to mean anything in the Atlantic corridor for the next 20 years was no longer really a question. He leaned back in his chair, Good, he said quietly, to no one in particular. Good. Arya folded her hands on the leather folder. All right, she said. Where were we? And she resumed. The next hour was the hour in which the shape of a new structure was laid out, line by line, over the table. It was an hour Dominic would later describe to no one, because he would never describe it to anyone, not even to Arya, because some things you simply do not describe, as the strangest hour of his life. He sat in the chair. He listened. He asked questions, a few of them, and they were good questions because he was not a stupid man, and because the part of him that had been shocked into silence in the first 20 minutes had now reluctantly come back online and was beginning to do its old work. He understood as she spoke that the structure she had built was not a coup. It was not even really a realignment. It was a kind of reinsurance, a way of binding the Falcone operation into a larger, slower, more patient web of interests, such that no single player, including Dominic himself, could ever again be pulled down by the kind of quiet internal rot that Arya had spent the last 18 months cataloging in her leather folder. He understood that it required him to give up certain things. He understood that it required him to share certain things. He understood that it required him, most importantly, to stop being the sole voice at the top of his own house. The younger Russian asked a question, in English, about the treatment of existing territorial agreements in the Gulf. Arya answered it. Bernard, who had not spoken in almost 40 minutes, cleared his throat and asked, in French, whether the Montreal families would be considered equals in the new arrangement or junior partners. Arya answered that, also in French, and she answered it in a way that made Bernard nod once, slowly, and turn to look at Dominic and say, still in French, "Your wife, Monsieur Falcone, is a very serious person." "I'm beginning to understand that," Dominic said, also in French, which was the first full sentence he had spoken in any language in 45 minutes. Bernard smiled faintly. "You are lucky," Bernard said. "Most of us, we married women who tried to kill us very slowly. Yours appears to be trying to keep you alive." "Yes," Dominic said. "I'm beginning to understand that too." The Greek laughed again. The Russians exchanged a glance. Vitale did not laugh, but the corners of his mouth did something that was, in Vitale, approximately the same as laughing, and Arya, at the head of the table, kept moving. At 11:22 in the morning, Vitale rose and held out his hand and said, "Dominic, Signora, I have a plane at 3. If we are agreed—" "We are agreed," Dominic said. Vitale inclined his head. "Then I will go. I will have my people send the papers tomorrow. Signora Falcone." He turned to Arya, and he took her hand and he kissed it once in a gesture that was neither flirtatious nor ironic, but simply formal, the way an old man in a dying tradition acknowledges the arrival of a new one. "It has been a privilege." "The privilege is mine, Signor Vitale." "No," Vitale said, and he was smiling, just a little with his mouth closed. "Not yet it isn't. But in a few years, perhaps, we will see." He kissed her hand again, and he walked out. The rest of them followed, one by one. The Greek, with a short bow. Bernard, with a nod. The Russians, who bowed together formally, as though they had rehearsed it. Each of them, before they left, paused in front of Dominic and did something small. A hand on his shoulder, a muttered word, a look. The Greek said, "Paid attention to your wife. Smart." The older Russian said nothing, but he clasped Dominic's forearm, and his grip was iron, and Dominic understood that this was a kind of blessing. When the last of them had gone, the oak room was silent. Marco was still standing against the wall. Elena Marchetti, whom Dominic had almost forgotten about, was still standing where she had been an hour earlier, her hands folded in front of her, her face composed. Arya stood up. "Elena," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You'll come home with us." Elena hesitated. She looked briefly at Dominic, then at Arya, then at the floor. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't be afraid," Arya said. "I'm not going to do anything to you. Nobody is going to do anything to you. We just need to have a conversation, the three of us, tonight, before anything else." "Yes, ma'am." Dominic looked at his wife. "Arya, tonight," she said, "at home, the three of us. And then in the morning, we begin." He nodded slowly. Marco stepped forward. He cleared his throat. Cars are still downstairs, boss. Thank you, Marco. Yes, boss. Marco turned to Arya. He hesitated. He had worked for the Falcones for 12 years, and in that time he had exchanged perhaps 30 sentences with the woman he had privately referred to, in conversations with his wife, as the Signora. Now he looked at her, and she looked back at him, and something passed between them that did not require words, because Teresa Battaglia had been Arya's friend for 11 years, and Marco had known that Teresa had a friend named Arya, and he had simply, like his boss, failed to do the math. Mrs. Falcone. Marco. He stopped. He wasn't sure what he was. I'm glad you're all right, ma'am. Thank you, Marco. Is there anything I can— Yes, Arya said. Call Teresa. Tell her it went the way we hoped. Tell her I'll come see her tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. Marco walked out. Dominic stood up. He walked around the table, slowly, until he was standing beside his wife. She was gathering her papers. Her hands were steady. Arya? Yes. I need to ask you something. All right. He hesitated. That morning, when you said you were on the phone with London. Yes. Was that Teresa? She looked up at him. No, she said. That was Vitale's daughter. She was confirming the seating arrangements for this meeting. I didn't want to lie to you, Dominic. I couldn't tell you. Not then. Not yet. I'm sorry. He nodded. Okay. He picked up her coat from the back of her chair. He held it out to her. He helped her into it, the way a man helps his wife into a coat at the end of a long evening, and she let him. And when she turned around to face him, for just a second, her face was not the face of the woman at the head of the table. It was the face of the woman in the cream-colored robe in the kitchen at 6:15 in the morning, and he looked at that face, and he understood, for the first time in perhaps 10 years, that he had been married, all along, to two women, the one he had been allowed to see and the one he had not, and that the one he had not was, and had always been, the one he had actually married. Let's go home, she said. They walked out of the oak room together. In the hallway, Elena Marchetti was waiting by the elevator. She straightened when she saw them. Her eyes flickered briefly to Dominic, and then more slowly to Arya. And the look in her eyes when she looked at Arya was a look Dominic recognized, because it was the same look he had sometimes seen in the eyes of young men in his own organization 20 years ago, when his father had still been alive. It was the look of a person who had just found out what they wanted to be when they grew up. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. Down in the lobby, Albert nodded silently to each of them as they passed. Outside, under the awning, Sal was waiting in the first car, and Theo was waiting in the follow, and the rain was still falling, as it had been for 3 days, soaking into the bones of the buildings and the people inside them. Arya got into the first car. Dominic got in beside her. Elena got into the third car, alone. Her navy suit unwrinkled, her hands folded in her lap, her spine the same 6 inches of chalk line it had been at 7 in the morning, when a different version of her had gotten into a different version of the same car, and thought, without knowing how wrong she was, that today was the day she would sit at Dominic Falcone's right hand. The motorcade pulled out into the wet street. In the back of the first car, Dominic Falcone looked out the window. His wife was looking out the other window. Between them, on the leather seat, her hand rested half open, palm up, in a gesture she had not made on purpose. He looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, without speaking, he put his hand in hers. She did not look at him, but her fingers closed around his, slowly, one at a time, and they rode the rest of the way home like that, through the rain, through the black veins of the city, neither of them saying a word because there was nothing to say yet, and because some of the most important conversations a marriage will ever have are conversations that begin quietly in the back of a car, with two people holding hands and looking out opposite windows at the same rain. They rode for almost 20 minutes without speaking. The motorcade moved slowly through midday traffic, the windshield wipers beating a soft, uneven rhythm, and somewhere around the turn onto Lexington, Dominic realized that he had been holding his wife's hand for so long that his own had gone slightly numb. He did not let go. He was afraid that if he let go, she would put her hand back in her lap, and he was not ready for his hand to be empty yet. It was Arya who finally spoke. We should stop and eat something. I'm not hungry. I know you're not hungry. I said we should stop. There's a difference. He looked at her. Arya, You're going to want food in you, she said, still looking out her window, before we get home. Trust me. He didn't ask why. He leaned forward and tapped on the partition. Sal. Yeah, boss. The place on 38th, the one with the veal. Tony's? Yeah, call ahead. Tell them we're coming. Back room. Just us. You want the third car with you? Dominic looked at Arya. She shook her head barely. No, he said. Send her home. Elena, take her to her apartment. Theo goes with her. She doesn't come to the house until tonight. Yes, boss. Sal picked up his phone. The motorcade shifted. The third car peeled off at the next light, turning north, and Dominic watched it go in the side mirror. He felt something lift off his chest as it disappeared. He didn't want to think about what that feeling meant, or what it suggested about him, or about the last 6 months, or about the version of himself he had been walking around being. Thank you, Arya said quietly. For what? For sending her home. Don't thank me for that. Why not? Because you shouldn't have to. She didn't say anything to that. She just looked out the window. Tony's was on a block he had been going to for 30 years. The building had been a speakeasy in the 20s, a jazz club in the 40s, and something that was never quite legal, but never quite illegal through most of the 60s and 70s. Now it was an unmarked restaurant with a single red door, a small brass plate that said nothing, and a back room that had, over the years, hosted more quiet conversations than any confessional in the 5 boroughs. Tony himself was 81 years old and had a bad hip and did not go home at night anymore because his wife had died in 2019 and he could not stand to be in the apartment alone. He met them at the door in a white shirt and a black vest, and when he saw Arya, something happened to his face that Dominic had never seen happen to Tony's face. Signora Falcone, Tony said. Hi, Tony. It's been too long. Yes. Tony looked at her for a long moment, with an expression Dominic could not quite read. Yes, it has. Dominic looked between them. You know each other. Tony glanced at Arya. Arya glanced at Tony. There was a small, quick, entirely wordless conversation that passed between them, of the kind that passes between people who have been keeping a secret together for a very long time. She comes in sometimes, Tony said mildly. For lunch. Since when? Since, Tony considered. A while. Tony? Come. Back room. I'll bring you the veal. Signora, the artichoke? The way you like it? Please. Dominic was still looking at Tony. How long have you been feeding my wife lunch, Tony? Tony, who had weathered 4 decades of difficult men asking him difficult questions, simply smiled. Long enough, he said, to know she tips better than you do. Come. Back room. Arya almost laughed. It was the closest thing to a real laugh Dominic had heard out of her in perhaps 2 years, and he heard it, and something in him bent toward the sound without his permission. The back room was small and warm, with a single round table and a red velvet banquette and a Tiffany lamp hanging from a brass chain. There was a bottle of red already open on the table and 2 glasses poured. Tony had called ahead to himself, apparently. Dominic pulled the chair out for his wife without thinking about it. She sat. He sat across from her. For a long moment, they just looked at the wine. You come here alone, he said finally. Sometimes. How often? Dominic. Does it matter? I'm asking. Once a month. Maybe twice. When I needed... She searched for the word, a table that wasn't mine. He thought about that. I've been coming to this place for 30 years, he said. Tony never once told me. No, Arya said. He wouldn't have. Why not? She looked at him across the table. Her face was very still. Because I asked him not to. He picked up his wine. He drank it slowly. The wine was good. Tony knew what he liked, although apparently Tony had known what Arya liked for longer than Dominic had realized. He set the glass down. Arya. Yes. How many people? How many people what, Dominic? How many people in my life have you been, he gestured vaguely, talking to? For how long? Behind me, without me knowing. She took a breath. That's a bigger question than you realize. Give me the number. I don't have a number. Give me a range. She looked at the wine. She looked at her hands. She looked finally back up at him. 40, maybe 50, some more than others, some only once, some for years. He nodded slowly, as though the number made sense, although it did not. And they all what? They all liked you better than me. It came out before he could stop it. He hadn't meant to say it. He had meant to ask something smarter, something that would have made him sound less like a boy who had just found out his brother was taller than him. But it was out now, and he could not take it back, and Arya, to her credit, to her enormous, painful credit, did not laugh at him. Dominic, don't. They didn't like me better than you. Okay, some of them did. Sure. But that's not why they talked to me. They talked to me because I asked them the right questions, and because I listened when they answered, and because I did not, ever, make them feel small for telling me the truth. That was it. That was the whole secret. That is the entire thing I have been doing for 2 years, Dominic. I let people tell me the truth, and then I remembered it. He stared at the tablecloth. You could have done that, she said very softly. You used to do that. When you were 29, 30 years old, you used to do that better than anyone I knew. It's how I fell in love with you. He looked up at her. You stopped. Yeah, I stopped. When? I don't know, Dominic. I'm not a therapist. Somewhere in your late 30s. After Carmine died, I think. Something happened to you when Carmine died. Carmine had been his younger brother. Carmine had died in 2016, in a way that was not officially a way that he had died, and the family had buried him in a closed casket with a folded flag that did not belong on any casket, and Dominic had not cried at the funeral. He had not cried at the funeral because Falcone men did not cry at funerals, and he had not cried afterward either, because afterward he had been too busy running the business, and because there had never been a good time, and because, he realized, sitting across from his wife in the back room of Tony's, 9 years too late, he had simply decided at some point in the weeks after the funeral that crying was a thing other men did. Weaker men. Men who could afford to. Carmine, he said. Yeah. You think this is about Carmine? I think a lot of things are about Carmine, Dominic. He drank more wine. Tony came in with 2 plates of something that steamed. Artichoke for her. Something involving veal for him. Tony set the plates down and did not speak and left the room. Dominic did not pick up his fork. I want to ask you something, he said. All right. When you went to Vitale, in Naples, that first time, what was the... He was struggling, he realized, to find the word. What was the thing? What was the thing that finally did it? What was the thing that made you get on a plane? She was quiet for a moment. You want the real answer? Yeah. You sure? Arya. She set her fork down. It was a Tuesday night in September. You had told me you would be home for dinner. I had made... She smiled, a small private smile. I had made that thing with the lamb, the one you used to like. I made it from scratch, Dominic, which I almost never did anymore, because you almost never came home for dinner anymore. But that Tuesday I did, because you had told me. You called me at 9:15 and you told me you weren't going to make it. You told me you were going to stay at the office. And then, at 10:30, I walked past your study to go to bed, and your coat was there. He blinked. My coat. You had been home. You had come home. You had gone into your study and closed the door, and you hadn't come out, and you had not told me, and I had been sitting in the kitchen with a plate of lamb that had gone cold, wondering if you were dead in a ditch somewhere, and you were 40 feet away from me with the door closed. He put his hand over his mouth. Arya, I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I know. I am telling you because you asked. I stood outside that door for a long time. I was going to knock. I had my hand up. And then I thought, what am I going to say? Hi, honey, you're home? Did you want some lamb? And I realized I didn't have anything to say. I realized I had been sitting in that kitchen for 4 years with nothing to say to you because you had stopped being somebody I knew how to talk to. And I went back to the kitchen and I put the lamb in a container and I threw it in the garbage, and then I sat at the counter and I cried for about 45 minutes, and then I stopped crying. And I went and got my laptop and I started making a list. Cookies. A list of what? Of everyone I used to know. Before you. Before this. I hadn't thought about most of them in 10 years. I started there. I made phone calls. I made them for 6 weeks before I ever called Vitale. And when I finally called Vitale, it was because by that point I had been told by 9 different people in 9 different cities that my husband was going to get himself killed inside of 18 months. Who were the 9 people? Dominic. Who? Not today. Arya. Not today. I gave you the terms. We had a deal. One good decision. You made it. I'm keeping up my end. But not today. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He picked up his fork. He put it back down. Eat, she said gently. Just a little. You're going to need it. He ate. He ate slowly, without tasting any of it, but he ate because she had told him to, and because for the first time in a long time, it occurred to him that there were a great many things she had told him to do over the years that he had not done, and that maybe, starting today, he could try doing some of them and see what happened. They ate in silence for a while. Elena, he said finally. Yes. Tonight, at the house. Yes. What do you want from her? Arya cut a piece of artichoke. She looked at it. She set it down. I want her to choose. Choose what? Whether she's mine or yours. He looked up sharply. She's not mine. She was. Arya. She was, Dominic. Not the way you think I mean. I'm not talking about the sleeping. I already told you I stopped caring about the sleeping. I mean, she was your protege. She was in your shadow. She was learning from you. And she was doing it because she thought, at the beginning, that you were the smartest person in the room. She doesn't think that anymore. She's been having second thoughts for 6 months. I know because I've been talking to her. Since when? Since the spring. Arya. I reached out to her through a mutual contact. I wanted to know if she could be trusted. And? The jury is still out. He put down his fork. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you have been having a parallel conversation with the woman I was, for 6 months. Yes. Does she know? That I'm your wife? She didn't. Not until this morning. So when she walked into that room thinking she was meeting a woman from London who had been mentoring her, very quietly, about potential opportunities outside of the Falcone organization. She walked into that room and she saw me at the head of the table, and she put it together about 4 seconds later, and then she did what she did, which was stand against the wall and say nothing. And that was her choice. No, that was her survival instinct. Tonight is her choice. He stared at his plate. Arya, I know. This is a lot. I know, Dominic. This is a lot to process in one morning. I know it is. And if there had been any way to do this more gently, I would have. I want you to know that. I thought about it for 2 years, Dominic. I thought about whether there was any kinder way. I couldn't find one. The only way this was going to work was if you saw it all at once, in a room where you couldn't bluff your way out of it, surrounded by men you respect. Otherwise, I would have dismissed it. Yes. And then gone out and killed the wrong people. Yes. And then gotten myself killed. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. I don't like what you're showing me, he said finally, about myself. I know you don't. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to know what to do with it today. Then when? Slowly. He looked at her. I'm 43 years old, Arya. I know how old you are. People don't change at 43. Some people do. Not this much. Maybe not. We'll see. She picked up her wine. But you don't have to change this much, Dominic. You just have to change enough. They finished eating. Tony came in and took the plates and did not speak. There was a plate of small biscotti and 2 coffees. Dominic drank the coffee. He was not, he realized, as tired as he should have been. He felt instead strangely clear, the way a man feels after a long fever breaks, and he wakes up at 4 a.m. to find that his sheets are soaked through, but that his head, for the first time in days, is empty. Arya. Yes. Tonight. At the house. When we have this conversation. What are the terms? There are no terms. There are always terms. She smiled faintly. Okay. There are 2. What are they? The first is that you don't interrupt me. Not while I'm talking to Elena, not while I'm telling you who has been selling you. You listen all the way through. You can ask questions at the end. And the second, she put down her cup. The second is that tonight, when it's over, whatever you decide about the business, you come to bed with me. He looked at her. Arya, I'm not asking you for anything else, Dominic. I'm not asking you to apologize for Elena. I'm not asking you to apologize for the lamb. I'm not asking you to apologize for any of it. I'm asking you, one time tonight, to come to bed with me. Not to do anything, just to be there. Because I have slept next to an empty pillow for 4 years, and I do not want to do it tonight. He felt his throat close. Okay, he said. Okay? Okay, Arya. She nodded once and looked down at her coffee, and he saw that her hand was shaking, slightly, as she lifted the cup, and that this was the first time he had seen her hands shake all day. He reached across the table. He put his hand on her wrist. Hey. She looked up. I'm here, he said. Okay, I'm here. She nodded. She didn't speak. He didn't let go of her wrist. They sat like that for a minute. Then Tony knocked on the door and came in and said that Sal was double parked and that a meter maid was circling. And Arya almost laughed, and Dominic paid the check in cash and left a tip that would, he thought, probably surprise Tony, and they walked out through the red door into the rain. In the car, Arya's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her face changed, very slightly. What? Dominic said. Teresa. Marco's wife. Yes. What does she say? Arya read it. She read it twice. She says, she looked up and she says that Marco just called her from the hospital. The hospital? Yes. Why? Because, Arya was scrolling, because about 20 minutes ago, someone put 4 bullets into the front window of a coffee shop on 58th Street, the coffee shop where Elena Marchetti goes every Wednesday for lunch. Dominic went very still. Is she? She's fine. She wasn't there. She was in the car on the way home. They were shooting at where she was supposed to be. He sat with that for a long moment. How did they know she was supposed to be there? He said. Because somebody told them she was supposed to be there. Somebody inside. Somebody inside. He looked out the window, the rain, the gray afternoon, the long wet street. Arya. Yes. I want to know the name. Tonight. Arya. They just tried to kill her for being in my car, for being near me. Whoever did this thinks the meeting this morning went the other way. They think I found out about them and they're moving. If I wait until tonight, they don't know how the meeting went, she said. Yes, they do. Somebody in that room, nobody in that room is going to talk. You don't know that. I do know that, Dominic. Do you understand me? I do know that. Because I have spent 2 years making sure of it. Nobody in that room is going to talk. The 4 bullets in that coffee shop window were fired on a schedule that was set 3 days ago. They were going to fire them no matter what happened in that meeting. They wanted her dead before tonight. Why tonight? Because they know she was going to be at our house tonight, and they didn't want her there to tell me what she knows. He stared at her. Arya. Yes. How many people know she's supposed to be at our house tonight? She looked at him steadily. 4, she said. Me, you, Elena, and 1 other person. His hands went cold. And who is the 4th? Dominic. Arya. Who is the 4th? She was quiet for a long, long moment. I told you, she said very softly. Tonight. Arya, they tried to kill her, and they failed, because I moved her car at the last minute, because I knew they might, because the 4th person is the person we have been playing this whole game around for 18 months, and I knew what they would do the second I gave them a target, and I gave them a target on purpose. He closed his eyes. You set her up. I protected her. You used her as bait. I protected her, Dominic. She is alive. She is in her apartment with 2 men outside her door, both of whom work for me and not for you. She will be at our house at 8 o'clock tonight. She will be safe. Arya. Tonight. He opened his eyes. He looked at his wife, at her still, steady face, at her folded hands, at the careful composure she had been carrying all day. And he understood fully, for the first time, that he had not simply been married to a woman he had failed to see. He had been married to a woman who was, in her own quiet way, a more dangerous operator than he was. Not crueler, not colder, just more patient. more willing to sit with a plan for 2 years without moving a single piece until the board was exactly the way she wanted it. He thought briefly about being afraid of her. He decided not to be. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "Okay, Arya." She exhaled. It was the first full breath, he thought, that he had seen her take all day. Sal pulled the car around the corner onto their street. The rain was harder now. The Falcone Tower rose above them in the gray. The doorman, Hector, stepped out from under the awning with a large black umbrella, because Hector had been Dominic's doorman for 11 years and knew that Dominic's wife did not like to get her hair wet. They got out of the car. Hector nodded. "Afternoon, Mr. Falcone. Mrs. Falcone." "Hector, anything you need?" "No, thanks." Arya paused. She put a hand on Hector's arm. "Hector, if anyone comes to the building this afternoon asking for us, anyone, you call up before you send them up, even if you know them, even if they say it's urgent." Hector looked at her. Then he looked at Dominic. Dominic nodded, once. "Yes, ma'am," Hector said. "Anyone." "Thank you." They rode up the elevator without speaking. The elevator was mirrored on 3 sides. Dominic watched his own reflection for the whole 42 floors. He looked at the man in the reflection for a long time. He did not recognize him entirely, but he did not dislike him as much as he had expected to. The doors opened on the penthouse. Regina was standing in the foyer. She had an apron on and a wooden spoon in her hand, and she had clearly been crying, although she was not crying now. "Regina," Arya said softly. "Signora. Are you all right?" Regina shook her head once. "Marco called me," she said, about the coffee shop. "He said to tell you Miss Marchetti is safe. He said to tell you that Mr. Battaglia is on his way here." "Thank you, Regina." "Signora, I know." Regina looked at her for a long moment. Then she set the wooden spoon down on the console table, and she walked forward, and she put her arms around Arya, which was a thing Regina had almost never done in 16 years. And she held Arya for a long time, and she said something very quietly in Italian into Arya's hair, and Arya nodded against her shoulder and said something quietly back. Dominic stood in the foyer with his coat still on and watched his housekeeper hold his wife, and understood, in a way that he would not have understood 6 hours ago, that this was a house that had been organized for many years around a person he had not known lived in it. Regina let go of Arya. She wiped her face. She picked up the wooden spoon. "I'll make coffee," she said in English, to nobody in particular, and she walked back into the kitchen. Arya took her coat off. She hung it in the closet. She did not look at Dominic for a long moment. Then she did. "Okay," she said quietly. "Now we wait." "For what?" "For Elena. For Marco. For the phone to ring. For—" She exhaled. "For the last move." He set his coat down. He walked to the window. The city below them was gray and wet and ordinary. Down on the street, Sal was still parked at the curb, his engine running, because Sal always left his engine running. Somewhere in this city, the person who had fired 4 bullets into a coffee shop window on 58th Street was sitting in a car or an apartment or a hotel room, waiting for a phone call that was going to tell them whether the bullets had hit. The phone call was not going to come. Dominic understood suddenly that this had been the part of the plan he had not been able to see. Not the meeting, not the commission, not any of it. The last piece, the piece Arya had been saving for last, was the piece he was standing inside of right now. This penthouse, this afternoon, this long gray wait. And the piece would not close until the phone rang. And the phone would ring soon, and when it rang, it would be a voice he knew. He knew. He didn't know the name, but he knew the shape of the name. The way you know the shape of a word you have been about to say for your whole life. He turned around. Arya was watching him. "You know," she said softly. "I know." "You've known all day." "I think so. Yes. Somewhere." She nodded. "Good," she said. "That will make this easier." She walked past him, into the living room. She sat down on the long, pale couch that she had picked out 8 years ago and that he had always thought was too pale. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked up at him. "Sit with me," she said. He sat. Outside, the rain kept falling, and down below, the city moved on without them. And inside, in a penthouse 42 floors above the wet black veins of a city that thought it still belonged to Dominic Falcone, Two people who had been married for 16 years sat on a pale couch and held hands and waited for a telephone to ring. The phone rang at 4:11. It rang on the small console table by the window, a heavy black house phone that Dominic had installed 16 years ago when they first moved in, and that almost no one called because almost no one had the number. Arya looked at it. She did not move. Dominic looked at it too. Neither of them got up right away. "That's him," she said. "Yeah." "Answer it." "Arya." "Answer it, Dominic. He needs to hear your voice, not mine." He stood up. His legs were a little stiff from sitting too long on the pale couch. He walked across the room. He let the phone ring one more time because he wanted one more second. Then he picked it up. "Yeah." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was not a long pause, but it was long enough that Dominic knew, in that pause, everything he needed to know. He had been hearing the silence on the other end of that line for 30 years. He had been hearing it since he was 13 years old, on a summer afternoon on the front porch of the house on Pelham Parkway, when a man had called him sir for the first time. "Dom. Uncle Sal. How'd it go?" Dominic closed his eyes. Salvatore Falcone was 67 years old. He was not technically Dominic's uncle. He was his father's cousin, which in the family was close enough, and which in the family meant everything. He had been the consigliere to Dominic's father for 22 years, and he had been the consigliere to Dominic for the 12 years since. He had stood at Dominic's shoulder at his father's funeral. He had walked Arya down the aisle at their wedding because her own father had been sick that weekend and could not travel. He had held Carmine's head in his lap in the back of an ambulance in the Bronx in 2016, and he had been, as far as anyone knew, the last person Carmine had spoken to before he died. "It went fine," Dominic said. Another pause. "Yeah?" "Yeah, deal's done. Vitaly signs tomorrow. Greeks in. Russians are in. Everybody's in." A longer pause. "Well," Sal said slowly. "Congratulations, kid." "Thanks. You coming in tonight?" "No, going to stay in. Long morning." Sure. Take a night. Hey, you hear about that thing on 58th? "Yeah, Marco called. Crazy. Middle of the afternoon. Nobody hurt, thank God, but still." "Yeah," Dominic said. "Crazy." There was a third pause. This one was the longest. Dominic stood at the window with the phone against his ear, and he looked down at the wet street, and he waited for his uncle to finish the sentence that his uncle had not yet started. "Dom." "Yeah." "Your wife. She all right?" "She's fine." "She at the house?" "Yeah." "Okay," Sal said. "Okay. Just checking." "Sure. Get some rest, kid." "Yeah." "Tell Arya I said hi." "Sure. Love you." "Love you too, Sal." He hung up. He stood at the window for a long time, with his hand still on the phone. He did not turn around. He could feel Arya watching him from the couch, and he was not quite ready yet to let her see his face. "Dominic, give me a second." "Take your time." He took a breath. "Sal?" "Yes." "My father's cousin?" "Yes." "Who was at Carmine's funeral? Who walked you down the aisle? Who has been in this house?" His voice cracked just a little. "For every Christmas for 16 years. "Yes." He turned around. She was sitting where he had left her hands folded in her lap, her face very still. She had been waiting to see his face for the last 5 minutes, and now she saw it, and she did not flinch, although he thought briefly that she wanted to. "How long?" he said. "A year and a half." "A year and a half?" "Yes." "You've known for a year and a half that Sal was selling me." "I've suspected for a year and a half. I've known for 11 months. How?" "Dominic." "How, Arya?" She took a breath. "He took a meeting in Toronto in May. I had a person in the room." "A person? A woman? A lawyer? She used to work for me years ago. She was there as an interpreter for somebody else. Sal didn't know her. She sat in the room for 45 minutes, and she listened to your uncle discuss, in some detail, with 3 men I could name, what the Falcone operation was going to look like after you were gone." He stared at her. "Arya. She called me from the airport. She read me her notes. I had her send them to a man who authenticates recordings. I then paid another man a great deal of money to verify that she had not been coerced and was not lying. It took me 6 weeks. At the end of the 6 weeks, I knew. And you didn't tell me. No. Arya. Dominic. If I had told you in May, if I had told you in June or July or any time up until last week, what would you have done? He didn't answer. You would have killed him, she said quietly. You would have killed him in the kitchen at Sunday dinner with your bare hands in front of your aunt, and you would have gone to prison, or somebody who was loyal to Sal would have killed you an hour later. And either way, Dominic, I would have lost you, and I was not willing to lose you. I am not willing to lose you, not to him, not to anyone. He sat down slowly on the arm of the couch. Sal, he said. Yes. My Uncle Sal. Yes. Why? Dominic. No, I'm asking. Why? He doesn't need money. He has money. He has his own crew. He has... Why? She looked at him. Carmine, she said. He went still. No. Yes. No, Arya. Yes. Sal loved Carmine. Sal was the one who... I know. Sal was the one who held him when he... I know, Dominic, I know. I know who held him. He was on his feet suddenly. He hadn't meant to stand up. He was just standing in the middle of the living room with his hands at his sides, and he did not know where to put them. Arya, you are telling me that my uncle, that my father's cousin, that the man who was at Carmine's funeral, that the man who carried his casket, has been planning to have me killed for 2 years because of something to do with Carmine. I am telling you, Arya said very carefully, that the reason is Carmine, yes, but not the way you think. Then what way? She was quiet for a long moment. He thinks you did it, she said finally. Did what? Carmine. The room tilted a little. He thinks you set him up. He has been telling himself that for 9 years, Dominic, since 2016, since the week of the funeral. He got it into his head somehow that Carmine was killed because Carmine was going to come to you about something, and that you knew, and that you sent him to the Bronx on purpose. He has told exactly 2 people, both of whom are now dead. But he has believed it for 9 years. And 2 years ago, I don't know what it was. Something tipped, something cracked. He decided he was going to avenge Carmine by having you killed, quietly, cleanly, from the inside, so that he could take the business, because he believes, and this is the part that is almost the saddest part, Dominic, he believes he is doing what Carmine would have wanted. Dominic sat down on the edge of the coffee table. He put his hands on his knees. He stared at the carpet. I didn't do that to Carmine. I know. Arya, I loved Carmine. I know you did, Dominic. I know you did. I was there. I was there every night for 2 weeks after the funeral. You couldn't eat. You couldn't sleep. You sat in the kitchen at 3 in the morning for 14 nights in a row. I know you loved him. I am the only person in the world who knows how much you loved him. Then why? Because grief makes people crazy, she said. Because Sal wasn't there when Carmine was born, and you were, and Sal couldn't protect him, and you were supposed to, and Carmine died anyway, and Sal has been looking for 9 years for somebody to blame, and you're the only person left. It doesn't matter that it isn't true. It only matters that he believes it, and he believes it very, very hard. Dominic made a sound. It wasn't a word, it was a sound. It was low and short, and he didn't know where in his body it had come from. He covered his face with his hands. Arya got up from the couch. She walked over to him. She knelt down in her black suit on the carpet in front of the coffee table. She put her hands on his wrists. She did not pull his hands away from his face. She just held his wrists. Dominic, don't. Dominic, look at me. He shook his head behind his hands. Look at me. He lowered his hands. He looked at her. She was closer to him than she had been in a long time. Her face was 5 inches from his. Her eyes were wet, for the first time all day, but she was not crying yet. She was very close to crying, and she was holding it back with a discipline that he recognized finally as his own, as the thing he had taught her over 16 years about how people in this world were supposed to hold their faces when the thing underneath was about to break. I'm sorry, she said. Arya, I am so sorry. I did not want you to learn it this way. I don't know what I wanted. I wanted it to not be true. I wanted to be wrong. For a year and a half, Dominic, I prayed I was wrong. I am telling you right now in this room, I would have given almost anything to be wrong. He put his forehead against hers. He had not done that in maybe 4 years. Their foreheads touched, and he closed his eyes, and he breathed her in. The familiar smell. The smell that had been on the pillow next to him every night for 16 years. The smell that he had stopped noticing, the way a man stops noticing the wallpaper in his own house. And something inside him, some very old stone he had been carrying somewhere behind his ribs, cracked clean down the middle. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in 2016, and he wasn't going to cry now. But he shook for about 30 seconds, and she held his wrists, and she let him shake, and she did not say a word. When he was still again, she spoke very quietly. Marco is on his way up. Okay. Elena will be here at 8. Okay? Sal is going to come here tonight. He opened his eyes. Here. Yes. Why? Because I invited him. He pulled back slightly. Arya. Dominic. You invited him here. Yes. Tonight. Yes. Why? She was very still. Because this has to end tonight, she said. Because if we wait, people die. Because if I send you after him, or he sends someone after you, there's going to be a war, and the war is going to ruin everything we built this morning. And a lot of people who did not choose this life are going to bury people they love. And I am not willing to let that happen when there is another way. What's the other way? The other way is that Sal walks into this apartment tonight at 9 o'clock, thinking he is coming to console his nephew, and he walks into a room, and in that room are you and me and Vitale, who has stayed in town, who is not on a plane at 3, who is in a hotel 6 blocks from here, and the Greek and Bernard. And the 5 of us tell him all at once what we know, and we tell him what his options are. And those are, he retires, Arya said. He goes to a house in Calabria that we have already arranged. He takes his wife. He takes whatever is in his accounts. He never comes back. He does not speak to anyone in this organization ever again. And in return, he lives. His children live. His grandchildren live. He gets to die in his bed in 20 years of something ordinary, and his wife gets to bury him, and that will be the end of it. And if he says no, Arya was quiet. Then he does not leave this apartment, she said. And Vitale and the Greek and Bernard are the 4 witnesses, and the commission ratifies it tomorrow, and we carry on. Dominic looked at her. You've thought of everything. I've tried. You set this up this morning, at the meeting. Yes. You got their buy-in, before he even knew. Yes. And you told them. I told them the truth, Dominic. I told them what he had done. I played them the recording. They believed me because the recording is the recording. And they agreed to be here tonight because, she took a breath, because they have all lost brothers, all of them. Vitale, the Greek, Bernard, both the Russians. Every one of them has buried someone they loved because another man in this business decided to solve a problem with a bullet. And they are tired of it. They are all tired of it, Dominic. They have been tired of it for a long time. And when I told them there was a way to do this without another body, they listened. He sat there on the edge of the coffee table, and he looked at his wife kneeling on the carpet in front of him, and he thought very quietly about the morning of their wedding 16 years ago. He had been 27. She had been 22. She had come down the aisle on Sal's arm because her father had had pneumonia, and Sal had been smiling, and Dominic had been standing at the altar, and he had looked at her walking toward him in a white dress, and he had thought, with the whole of his stupid young heart, that he had won. That was the word he had used in his head that morning, won. He had not understood, he had had no way of understanding, at 27, that what he had done was something much more difficult than winning, and that the difficult thing would only become visible to him 16 years later, on a wet afternoon in April, in his own living room, with his knees 6 inches from his wife's knees and his uncle's name sitting on the carpet between them like a fallen glass. Arya. Yes. Is there anything else? Anything else how? Anything else I don't know? Anything else you've been carrying? About me? About him? About any of it? She considered. Yes, she said. Tell me. It's small. Tell me anyway. She was quiet. The night Carmine died, she said. You came home at 4 in the morning. I was awake. I was in the kitchen. I hadn't gone to bed. You walked in, and you didn't see me. And you went to the liquor cabinet, and you took out the bottle of grappa your father had left you, and you poured yourself a glass, and you sat down on the floor with your back against the refrigerator. And you sat there for about 20 minutes. And then you said, out loud, to the empty room, I shouldn't have sent him. And then you drank the grappa. And then you got up, and you went to bed, and you have never once in 9 years told me you said that. Dominic stared at her. You were in the kitchen. Yes. I didn't see you. No. Arya, I didn't send him to the Bronx. I didn't send him anywhere. He went on his own. I know that. Then why? Because you thought you had. For a long time. Because you thought that if you had said something different that afternoon when he came to you, he wouldn't have gone. You thought that for months. You never said it to anyone else, but you said it to an empty kitchen, once, at 4 in the morning. And I have been carrying that sentence around for 9 years. And I am telling it to you now because Sal believes something very close to that. And I don't want you to hear about his version tonight and wonder if somehow underneath he might be right. He is not right. You didn't send Carmine anywhere. Carmine went. You're not responsible for what happened to him. I have been trying to find a way to say that to you in this house for 9 years, and you have never let me, and so I am saying it now. He did cry then. Not much. Not loudly. It was a short, hard thing, his face in his hands for maybe 40 seconds, and Arya on the carpet with her forehead against his knee. When he was done, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, and he breathed out slowly, and he said, Okay. Okay? Okay, baby. She looked up at him. Baby, she said. Yeah. You haven't called me that in... I know, she smiled. It was small and wet and tired. Hi, she said. Hi. They stayed like that for about another minute. Then the intercom buzzed at the front door, and Regina's voice came from the kitchen, and somewhere down the hall a door opened, and Marco Battaglia came into the foyer, wet from the rain, and the machinery of the evening began to move. Marco was pale. He was always pale after a stress event. His wife had once, at a Christmas party, told Arya that this was the first thing she had noticed about Marco when she met him, that he went white instead of red. And he was very pale now. He had his suit jacket over his arm. There was a small dark stain on his shirt cuff that Dominic recognized, without comment, as blood. Not a lot of blood, somebody else's. Boss? Marco. Mrs. Falcone. Hi, Marco. Marco looked between them. He took in their faces. He took in the fact that Arya had been on the carpet and had now stood up, and that Dominic's eyes were red, and that there was a lot in this room he had not, in 12 years of service, ever seen. Miss Marchetti is at her apartment, he said carefully. 2 of the Signora's men are in the hallway, 2 more in the lobby. She's fine, scared, but fine. She'll be here at 8 like planned. Thank you, Marco. The coffee shop, nobody hurt. Owner's a friend of Tony's. We're handling it. Good. Sal called me at 3. Dominic looked up. Yeah? Yeah. Wanted to know how you were doing. Said he'd heard about the coffee shop. Said he was worried. What'd you tell him? I told him you were at home with your wife and didn't want to be disturbed. And he said that was good. He said... Marco hesitated and looked briefly at Arya and then back. He said it was good that you and Mrs. Falcone were spending some time together. He said he'd always thought you two needed more of that. Dominic made a small, short sound. It was almost a laugh. It was not a laugh. Did he? Yes, boss. Okay. Marco shifted his weight. Boss. Yeah. Teresa told me, on the way over, about... He gestured vaguely, the way men in their world gesture at things they do not have the words for. About Sal. Yeah. I'm sorry, boss. Don't be. No, Marco swallowed. I mean, I'm sorry I didn't see it. I've been in rooms with him. I should have... Marco. Yes, boss. Nobody saw it. Yes, boss. Not even me. Yes, boss. Especially not me. Marco nodded slowly. Yes, boss. Go wash up, eat something. Regina's got food. 9 o'clock is going to be a long night. Yes, boss. Marco walked through into the kitchen. Regina's voice greeted him, low and warm, and somewhere a chair scraped against the tile, and the ordinary sounds of a house settling into the late afternoon resumed. Arya was looking at Dominic. You okay? No. No? No, Arya. She nodded. Okay. But I'm here. Okay. And I'm going to do what you want me to do tonight. Thank you. Don't thank me. Why not? Because this isn't the kind of thing a man gets thanked for. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said quietly. He stood up from the coffee table. I need a minute, he said. Alone. In the study. Take all the time you need. 30 minutes. Take 30 minutes. He walked down the hallway, past the framed photographs of his father and his father's father, and the one photograph of Carmine as a 6-year-old in a Yankees cap, which Dominic had not been able to look at directly in 9 years. He walked into his study. He closed the door behind him. He stood in the middle of the room, among the books he had never read, and the globe that he kept for decoration, and the heavy leather chair his father had died in, and he let himself, for the first time really, since he was a small boy, not be Dominic Falcone for a minute. He stood there, and he thought about his brother. He thought about Carmine at 11, running ahead of him through the park in June. He thought about Carmine at 19, crying at their mother's funeral, in a way Dominic had never been able to. He thought about Carmine at 28, 2 weeks before the Bronx, sitting at the kitchen island and eating a piece of cake at midnight with his bare hands, laughing at something on his phone. He thought about Carmine's hand, the last time he had held it, which had been cold. He thought about his Uncle Sal at the funeral, standing at the foot of the casket, his face wet, his hands shaking. He had thought at the time that Sal was grieving. He had been right. But he had been wrong about what Sal was grieving, and he had been wrong about where that grief was going to go, and he had been wrong for 9 years, and he had not been the only one. And that, not the deal, not the meeting, not the woman at the head of the table, not the 4 bullets in the coffee shop window, was the thing he was going to have to sit with for the rest of his life. He sat down in his father's chair. He did not cry. He had done his crying. He simply sat. After a while, he reached for the phone on the desk. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang 3 times. Yeah. Sal. A pause. Dom, everything all right? Yeah. Yeah, I'm fine. Listen, can you come over tonight? 9 o'clock. Just you. Arya's making a thing. I want to talk to you. A longer pause. Sure, kid. Of course. Everything okay? Yeah, today was a lot. I want to sit with family for a minute. Of course, Dom, of course. I'll be there. You want me to bring anything? No, just come. Sure, kid. I'll see you at 9. Uncle Sal? Yeah. I love you. There was a silence on the other end of the phone. It was long. When Sal's voice came back, it was a little rough, a little thick. I love you too, Dommy. He hadn't called him that since he was 9 years old. Dominic hung up. He sat in his father's chair for another minute. Then he stood up, and he walked back out to the living room, and his wife was standing by the window looking down at the wet street, and she turned when he came in. Done? Done. He's coming. He's coming. She nodded. He walked over to her. He stood beside her at the window. Down below, the rain had slowed a little. The streetlights were coming on, even though it was only 5 o'clock, because the sky was that dark. Somewhere out there, Elena Marchetti was in her apartment with 2 men in the hallway, packing a small bag. Somewhere out there, Vitale was in a hotel room, eating lunch and reading a newspaper in Italian and waiting for the time. Somewhere out there, Salvatore Falcone was putting on a jacket and telling his wife, Gina, that he'd be home by 11, and Gina, who did not know, who had not been told, and who would never, if Arya had anything to do with it, find out what her husband had done, was telling him to drive safe and not to forget his scarf. 4 hours, Arya said softly. 4 hours. You okay? No. I know. He put his arm around her shoulders. It was a thing he had not done in a long time. She leaned into him carefully, the way a person leans into a wall they are not quite sure will hold. It held. They stood there for a long time, looking down at the rain, and the phone did not ring again. And somewhere in the kitchen, Regina was heating a pot of something that smelled like rosemary, and Marco was on his second cup of coffee, and the city below them was moving in its slow, wet, ordinary way. And in 4 hours, a man they both loved was going to walk through the door of this apartment, and nothing, for anyone in it, would ever be the same. Elena Marchetti arrived at 2 minutes past 8. She came up through the service elevator, not the main one, because that was how Aria had arranged it. She was wearing jeans and a gray sweater and flat shoes, which was not a thing Dominic had ever seen her wear, and her hair was down, which was also not a thing he had ever seen. And when she stepped out into the foyer, she looked, for the first time since he had known her actual age. 26 years old, with a small bag over her shoulder, a smudge of mascara under one eye where she had rubbed it without meaning to, and the particular look of a young woman who has recently been reminded that she is not, in fact, invulnerable. Aria met her in the foyer. "Elena?" "Mrs. Falcone." Come in. Give me your coat." Elena did not give her coat. She stood just inside the doorway, her bag still on her shoulder, and she looked at Aria for a long moment. "I want to say something first." "All right. I want to say that—" Elena stopped. She started again. "I want to say that I did not know. About you. Until today. I swear to God I didn't. I know, Elena. I thought you were She looked down. "I thought you were what he said you were. I believed him. I'm sorry." "Elena." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Falcone." Aria reached out. She took the bag off Elena's shoulder. She set it down on the console table. Then she put her hand on Elena's cheek, very briefly, the way a mother puts her hand on a daughter's cheek at the end of a long day, and she said, "Look at me." Elena looked at her. "You are 26 years old," Aria said quietly. "You grew up with almost nothing. You watched your father die with $11,000 in the bank. You met a man who offered you a life you had no other way to reach. You took it. That is not a thing you have to apologize to me for, Elena. Do you understand me? Not to me. Not tonight." Elena's mouth trembled, just a little. "Yes, ma'am. Now come in. Eat something. Regina made too much of everything, the way she always does. We have an hour before Sal gets here." Elena followed her in. Dominic was standing by the window. He watched the two of them walk through the living room toward the kitchen, and he watched the way Elena's shoulders, which he had spent 2 years watching across meeting rooms and boardrooms, and for 2 afternoons across a hotel room in which he knew very well, dropped a full inch when Aria put a hand between her shoulder blades. He had done that to her, he thought. He had made her hold her shoulders an inch higher than they needed to be for 2 years, and he had never once noticed, and his wife had noticed it in 10 seconds. He stayed at the window. He wasn't ready to be in the kitchen yet. He listened instead. He heard Regina's voice. He heard Elena say something that sounded like "thank you." He heard Aria laugh, once, briefly, at something one of them said. And it was a small sound, but it was real, and Dominic realized, standing at the window, that he had not heard his wife laugh in his own kitchen in perhaps 2 years. This was the thing, he thought, that he had not understood that morning, standing in the charcoal suit with his back to the room. That a house could go quiet around a man, and the man could mistake the quiet for peace. That a marriage could empty itself out under him, 1 year at a time, and he could stand in the middle of the empty room and not know the room was empty because he had stopped listening for any of the sounds that would have told him so. He watched his own reflection in the dark glass. He did not like the man he saw there. He did not quite hate him either. He saw a man of 43 years, with some gray in his hair, with a suit that had cost him what a teacher made in a month, and with tired eyes that had not been tired 6 months ago. He saw a man who had been handed, at 26, a kingdom, and who had spent 17 years trying to prove to a dead father that he deserved it, and who had, somewhere in the middle of that trying, forgotten that the kingdom had a kitchen in it, and that in the kitchen there had been a woman who had loved him, and that the woman had been trying the whole time to tell him something. The intercom buzzed at 8:47. Hector's voice came through, steady and careful. "Mr. Falcone, Mr. Vitale is here, and a gentleman named Bernard, and another gentleman who says his name is Costas." "Send them up, Hector." "Yes, sir." They came up together, Vitale first, then Bernard, then the Greek, whose full name Dominic had known for almost 20 years and had never once used to his face. They came in out of the rain in long coats, and Regina took the coats without a word, and Arya met them at the door and kissed each of them once, on the cheek, the way she had kissed Tony, because these were her people now, and Dominic understood, with a small and private twist of something that was not jealousy but was related to jealousy, that they had been her people for longer than he had known. Vitale embraced him, properly, with both arms. Dominic, Signor Vitale, tonight is not going to be easy. No, I have buried my own brother, in 1992. Not the same, but close. I tell you this so that you know that I understand, in a way other men in this room do not understand, what you are about to do. Thank you, Signor Vitale. You did not send him, Dominic. I know. Do you? Dominic was quiet for a moment. I am working on it, he said. Vitale clapped him once, gently, on the shoulder. That is all any of us do, he said, working on it. He moved on into the living room. Bernard shook Dominic's hand in the French way, both hands, and said nothing, and moved on. The Greek looked at him for a long moment and then said, in his accent that was thicker than it needed to be, because the Greek liked to be slightly underestimated by Americans, "Tonight you become a different kind of man, my friend." Maybe, not maybe. It is already happening. I am telling you. My wife, he gestured vaguely at his own chest. My wife, she watched me go through something similar, a long time ago. She told me once that it is not a thing that happens in a day. It is a thing that begins in a day. You understand? I understand. Good. The Greek clapped him on the other shoulder and went on. They gathered in the living room. Regina brought espresso on a silver tray and then disappeared into the back of the apartment because Regina had a long memory and a firm policy about which conversations she did not witness. Marco stood by the hallway entrance where he had stood for the better part of 4 hours. Elena came out of the kitchen and sat in a small chair by the bookshelf, her hands folded in her lap, her spine the 6 inches of chalk line that her grandmother had taught her a very long time ago. The clock on the wall moved. At 8:58, the intercom buzzed again. Mr. Falcone, your uncle is here. Dominic closed his eyes briefly. He opened them. Send him up, Hector. Yes, sir. There was a silence in the room. Arya came to stand beside Dominic. She did not take his hand. She stood close enough that he could feel her shoulder against his. That was enough. You don't have to speak first, she said quietly. Yes, I do. Dominic. I do, Arya. He's my family. It has to come from me. She nodded. The elevator chimed in the hallway. Marco stepped toward the door. He opened it. Salvatore Falcone walked in. He was a big man, Sal, broad across the chest in the way of men who had worked with their bodies when they were young and then stopped, and he was wearing a dark blue suit that was slightly too tight at the collar, and a gray wool coat, and a scarf, because his wife had told him to bring a scarf. He was smiling as he came in. He was smiling the smile of a man who had come to his nephew's apartment to console him after a long day, and who did not yet know, who could not yet know, what was waiting in the living room. "Dommy!" he called out from the foyer. "Where are you, kid? It's freezing out there. He stepped into the living room. He stopped. He saw Vitale first, then the Greek, then Bernard. Then, last, because his eyes had skipped past her on the way in, he saw Arya, standing at Dominic's shoulder, very still, with her hands folded in front of her. The smile did not leave Sal's face right away. It took a second. It took a second and a half. Dominic watched the second and a half happen, and he watched his uncle's face do what a face does when a man realizes that he has walked into the wrong room and that there is no longer any good way out of it. "Uncle Sal!" "Dommy." "Come in. Sit down." Sal did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the living room, his coat still on, his scarf still hanging loose around his neck. He looked around the room, slowly, from face to face. When his eyes got to Arya, they stayed there for a long moment. She did not look away. "Signora," Sal said quietly. "Sal, this is your doing." "Yes." He nodded slowly, once. "Sit down, Uncle Sal," Dominic said again. Sal sat down. He sat down on the edge of the pale couch, with his coat still on, his hands resting on his knees. He looked smaller on the couch than he had looked in the foyer. He looked, Dominic realized with a small cold shock, like an old man. He had been looking at Sal for 43 years, and he had never once thought of him as an old man. But sitting on the edge of the pale couch in his coat, with his hands on his knees, Sal was an old man, and he had been one for a while, and Dominic had not seen it, because Dominic had not apparently been seeing a lot of things. "Can I get you something?" Arya said quietly. "Water, whiskey." "No. No, thank you, Signora." "All right." She sat down in the chair opposite the couch. Dominic remained standing. Vitale and Bernard and the Greek sat, quietly, in the 3 chairs that had been arranged, not quite in a semicircle, not quite in a row, but in a way that made it clear that this was not a dinner party. Dominic cleared his throat. "Uncle Sal?" "Yeah, Dommy." "We know." There was a long, long silence. Sal did not look up. He looked at his hands. He was quiet for what felt like a full minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "What do you know?" "We know about Toronto, in May. We have the transcript. We have the recording. We have 2 of the men who were in the room. They have both spoken to Signor Vitale. They have both separately confirmed what you said and what you offered and what you were going to be paid." Sal did not move. "We know about the coffee shop today. We know who you called. We know who they called. The man who fired the shots is in a room right now with 2 of Signor Vitale's people, and he has told them everything. He gave you up about 20 minutes ago. I'm sorry, Uncle Sal. There is no version of this where you walk out of here and tell me I'm wrong. We know." Sal lifted his head finally. He looked at Dominic. His eyes were wet. "Dommy, don't. Dommy, listen to me. Uncle Sal, he was my godson, your brother. He was my godson, Dommy. I held him the day he was born. I know you did. Sal's voice broke. "I sat with him in that ambulance, Dommy. I had his head in my lap. I felt him. I felt him go. In my hands. I sat with him and I watched him go. And I have had to live with that, Dommy, every single morning. For 9 years, I have had to wake up and live with that. And you have never once in 9 years sat with me and talked about him. Not once. You changed the subject every time. I know. You didn't even cry at the funeral. I know, Uncle Sal. I looked at you at that funeral and your face was empty, Dommy. My boy's in a box and your face is empty. And I thought, what kind of man? Uncle Sal. What kind of man does that to his brother? I didn't send him, Uncle Sal. I thought you did. I know you thought that. I know. I thought you sent him. And I thought you came home that night, and I thought you went to sleep, Dommy. I thought you went to sleep. Like nothing. I didn't sleep." Sal stopped. "I didn't sleep for 2 weeks, Uncle Sal. I sat in the kitchen. Arya was there. She was in the kitchen. She saw me. I said things out loud to an empty room because I thought the room was empty. She heard me. She has been carrying what I said for 9 years because I would not let her say it back to me. I have not slept, Uncle Sal, since 2016, in the way that I used to sleep before then, and I am telling you right now to your face, in front of these men, that I did not send my brother to the Bronx and that I loved him, and that if I had known what was waiting for him there, I would have, his voice broke. Arya stood up, quietly, and came to stand beside him. She did not touch him, she just stood there. Sal looked at Dominic. For a long time he looked at him. Then very slowly something went out of his face. It was not exactly belief, it was not exactly relief. It was something closer to the look of a man who has been carrying a very heavy thing up a flight of stairs for 9 years, and who has just been told, at the top, that the thing was never his to carry. "Dommy, yeah, I know, Uncle Sal. I made a mistake. Yeah, oh God, Dommy, I made a terrible mistake. I know. Gina doesn't know. She won't. Sal put his face in his hands. She can't know, Dommy. She can't. It would kill her. It would kill her, Dommy. She won't know, Uncle Sal. I promise you, she will never know." There was a long silence. Vitale, on the other side of the room, cleared his throat very quietly. Salvatore. Sal did not look up. Salvatore, look at me. Sal looked up. Vitale's face was kind. It was a kindness that had been earned over 64 years, and it was offered now the way an old doctor offers a diagnosis. Carefully, deliberately, without any softness that would make the truth harder to carry. You are going to go to Calabria, Vitale said. There is a house. It has been prepared. It is not a prison. It is a house. Your Gina will come with you. You will tell her. You will tell her whatever story we decide on tonight. A health matter, a family property, something. You will leave in 3 days. You will not come back. Do you understand me, Salvatore? Yes. You will not call anyone from this organization ever again. You will not write anyone. You will not reach out, even to say hello, even at Christmas, even when somebody dies. You are done. Do you understand? Yes. Your children are safe. Your grandchildren are safe. Gina is safe. You are safe. But only if you go, only if you disappear, only if you understand that this, he gestured around the room, is the gift your nephew's wife is giving you. A gift, Salvatore. Because I will tell you, and I am an old man, and I do not lie anymore, that in any other room in this business, on this continent, tonight, with what you have done, you would not be sitting upright in that chair. Sal swallowed. I understand, Signor Vitale. Good. Vitale sat back. Sal looked at Arya. Signora. Sal. I don't know how to... Don't, Sal. I don't know how to thank you. Sal, please don't thank me for this. I am not doing it for you. I am doing it for Gina. I am doing it for your daughters. I am doing it because there is a small grandson of yours who calls you nonno, and who does not deserve to grow up with a story about you that nobody will tell him. I am doing it for them. You understand me? Yes, Signora. Good. Sal sat on the couch for another minute, with his coat still on, with his hands folded on his knees, and he looked very small. Then he stood up slowly. He looked at Dominic. Dommy. Yeah, Uncle Sal. Can I... He hesitated. Can I hug you? One time, before I go. Dominic looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped forward. They embraced in the middle of the living room, under the chandelier that Arya had picked out in 2014, in front of 4 of the most dangerous men in the Atlantic corridor, and one 26-year-old woman in a gray sweater, and one wife who had spent 2 years building a room that would not require a single bullet to be fired in it. Sal held on for a long time. Dominic felt his uncle shake against his shoulder, felt the old man's face press into the collar of his suit, felt the wet of tears on a collar that had been dry coming into the room. He thought briefly about his father. He thought about the day his father had died, in that leather chair in the study, and about how Sal had been the one to close his father's eyes, because Dominic had not been able to make his hand move. He thought about how Sal had held him that night, too, when nobody was looking, and had not told anyone afterward because some things between men were not things you told. He held his uncle back. I forgive you, Uncle Sal, he said very quietly into the old man's ear. I want you to hear me say it. I forgive you. I love you. Go home, pack, kiss Gina for me, and go. Sal made a sound against his shoulder that was not a word. Then he let go. He turned. He walked slowly toward the door. He did not look back. Marco stepped aside to let him pass. The door opened. The door closed. The elevator chimed. He was gone. And that was the end of it. The last of the business of the Falcone Empire, in its old shape, in its old bones, walked out the door of that penthouse at 9:41 in the evening and rode down 42 floors to a black car driven by a man who had been paid to take him home to his wife, who would be told, over the next 3 days, a careful and kind and almost entirely false story, and who would go with her husband to a house in Calabria and would live there for another 11 years, until Salvatore Falcone died in his sleep of something ordinary and was buried under a name that was not the name he had been born with, in a plot that had been paid for, discreetly, by his nephew's wife. But that was a long time from now. Right now, in the living room, nobody spoke. Vitale was the first to move. He rose slowly from his chair. He walked to Dominic. He took both of Dominic's hands in both of his own. You did a hard thing, Dominic. It was my wife's doing. No, she built the room. You walked into it. Those are not the same thing. Many men, given her room, would have walked into it and set it on fire anyway. You did not. That is you. Remember that. Thank you. We will talk tomorrow. Rest tonight. Hold your wife. Vitale embraced him again, briefly, and then embraced Arya, and then he and Bernard and the Greek gathered their coats and went out one by one into the rain, and the penthouse slowly went quiet again. Marco stayed another 20 minutes. He and Dominic stood in the kitchen and drank one glass of whiskey each, standing up without speaking much. Then Marco put his hand on Dominic's shoulder and said, "Good night, boss." And Dominic said, "Good night, Marco." And Marco left and went home to his wife Teresa and his two daughters, and sat on the edge of his daughter Ariella's bed and watched her sleep for a long time, because there had been a morning, that morning, when he had not been entirely sure he would get to. Elena was still in the chair by the bookshelf. Arya went to her. "Elena, Mrs. Falcone, I want you to stay tonight in the guest room, not because you're in danger, you are not anymore, but because tonight you should not be alone in that apartment. In the morning, we'll talk, properly, about what comes next. For you, not for anyone else. For you. All right?" Elena nodded. She did not trust her voice. Arya looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to be all right, Elena," she said quietly. "You're going to have a very good life. You're going to have it on your own terms. I will help you if you want me to. But even if you don't, you're going to be all right. Do you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Regina appeared in the doorway because Regina always appeared at the right moment, and she led Elena down the hallway to the guest room, and the guest room door closed, and the apartment, finally, was quiet. Arya and Dominic stood alone in the living room. It was 20 past 10. The rain had stopped, finally, at some point during the last half hour. Through the window, the sky over the city was the strange, luminous dark of a city after a long rain, with the streets shining and the clouds moving fast and low, and a wash of light along the eastern horizon that was not quite the next day yet, but was not entirely the night anymore either. Dominic looked at his wife. She looked tired. It was the first time all day that she had looked tired. Her shoulders had come down, finally. The careful composure she had been carrying since 6:15 that morning had fallen away from her face, and what was underneath was a woman of 40, with tired eyes and a little bit of mascara smudged under the left one, and a small, private, exhausted smile that she was aiming at no one in particular. "You did it," he said. "We did it. Arya, you did it. I was here for the end. You did the rest." She didn't argue. She was too tired to argue. "Okay," she said. "Come to bed with me." She looked at him. "You said that was the second term," he said. "So I'm coming to collect it. Come to bed with me." She laughed. It was a tired, small, real laugh. "Okay," she said. They walked down the hallway together. They did not hold hands. They did not need to. They walked past the photographs of his father and his father's father, and past the photograph of Carmine in the Yankees cap that Dominic still could not look at directly, but that he would, he thought, be able to look at directly, eventually, maybe by next Christmas, maybe later. And they walked into the bedroom that they had shared for 16 years. And for the first time in 4 of those years, they shared it. He did not take off his suit right away. He sat on the edge of the bed. Arya sat next to him. They sat there for a long time, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the opposite wall, at a painting she had bought in 2011 that he had always thought he didn't like, and now realized, sitting next to her on the edge of the bed, that he had never actually looked at. "Arya." "Yes." "I want to say something." "All right." He took a breath. "I thought this morning that I owned the world. I walked out of here in that suit, and I got in that car, and I thought—" He shook his head. "I thought I was the king of something. And I was wrong. I was so wrong, Arya. I didn't own any of it. Not the business. Not this house. Not you. I had been walking around for 17 years telling myself a story about who I was and what I had built. And the story was wrong. Not because I didn't build anything. I did. I built a lot. But I didn't build it by myself. I never did. You built half of it, and you built it in the dark because I wouldn't turn the light on. And my uncle built part of it, even in the way that he broke it. And Carmine, and my father, and men I forgot the names of. I built it with a lot of people, Arya, and I took the credit by myself. And when I took the credit by myself, I took the weight by myself too. And the weight was what broke me. and I didn't even know I was broken. She was quiet. I don't know how to be the other thing yet, he said. The thing I'm supposed to be now. I don't know how. I'm 43 years old and I don't know how. I'm going to be bad at it. I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to forget things. I'm going to slip back. You're going to have to tell me, even when I don't want to hear it, especially when I don't want to hear it. You have to promise me you'll tell me. Dominic, promise me, Arya. I promise. Because the worst thing in my life, the worst thing, Arya, the worst thing that has ever happened to me is not Carmine. It is not my father. It is not what my uncle did tonight. The worst thing is that I lived in a house with you for 16 years and I made you invisible. And I didn't mean to, and that is worse than meaning to, because it means I did it without even, I know. I'm sorry. I know, Dominic. I'm so sorry. I know, baby. I know. She turned toward him. She put her hand on his face. He leaned into her hand. He closed his eyes. They sat like that for a while. We're going to be okay, she said, very quietly. Yeah? Yeah? Promise? I don't make promises like that, Dominic. You know I don't. Nobody does. But we have a shot. We have a better shot tonight than we had this morning. And we will have a better shot tomorrow than we have tonight if we work at it. That is the only kind of promise there is. He opened his eyes. That'll do, he said. That'll have to. He took off his suit, finally, folded it over the chair. She changed quietly in the bathroom. When she came out, in a soft cotton thing he had not seen in years, she got into bed on her side, the side she had been sleeping on alone for 4 years. And he got in on his, and he reached across the space between them, and he took her hand, and he pulled her gently across the space. She came. She lay with her head against his shoulder. He could feel her breathing. He could feel her hair on his collarbone. He could feel, underneath the warm, small weight of her, the absolute and shocking ordinariness of a thing he had done 1,000 times in the first years of their marriage, and had simply, somewhere along the way, stopped doing. He thought, for a long moment, about all the nights she had lain here without him. He thought about the plate of lamb in the garbage, and the cold coffee in the hospital hallway, and the coat in the study, and the list she had made on her laptop at 3 a.m, and the flight to Naples that had become, in her telling of it, a visit to a cousin in Boston who did not exist. He thought about how many nights he had, by not coming, taught her to be the woman she had become. And he thought, with something that was not quite regret, but was close enough that he didn't want to name it any more precisely, that he was grateful for the woman she had become, even though the price of her becoming had been, in part, the slow erasure of the woman he had married. Maybe, he thought, maybe this was the only way it was ever going to work. Maybe some marriages only woke up once one of the two people in them had gone far enough away that the other one finally noticed they were gone. Maybe the gift his wife had given him was not the deal, not the room, not the salvation of his life and his empire and his name. Maybe the gift she had given him was the chance, at 43, to fall in love with her a second time. This time with his eyes open, this time on her terms, this time knowing exactly who she was. Because she had taught him, over one long wet April day, exactly who she was. Arya. When we were at Tony's today, you said something about the business, about what comes next, tomorrow. I remember? What does it look like? Give me just the shape of it, just so I can sleep. She was quiet for a moment against his shoulder. Tomorrow, she said, we start making it something that doesn't eat its own young. We start making it something that lasts. We don't run people on fear anymore. We run them on terms. We pay them properly. We promote the ones who can think. We let Elena come up, if she wants to. We let Marco have a real role, not just a car door. We let Teresa come to Sunday dinners. We invest in things that make money slowly, not just things that make money fast, because the fast things are what killed your father and were going to kill you. We make alliances, not kingdoms. We stop pretending we're pretending. Is that all? She almost laughed. For now, that's all. Okay. Go to sleep, Dominic. In a minute. He lay there with his arm around her, and he looked up at the dark ceiling, and he thought, a man spends his whole life being told that power is the thing you hold on to tightest, and he spends his whole life trying to hold on tightest. And then one day a woman he has failed to notice sits down at the head of a table and shows him, in one long, quiet afternoon, that power held tightest is power that nobody else can touch. And power that nobody else can touch is, in the end, just another word for loneliness. And loneliness, it turns out, is what kills you. Not the Russians, not the bratva, not the uncle you loved. Loneliness. The quiet of a house where no one is listening. The cold of a plate of lamb that nobody came home to eat. A man could, if he was lucky, unlearn that. A man could, if he was very lucky, be married to a woman who refused to let him die of it. He was, he realized, a man who was very lucky. He closed his eyes. Arya. Thank you. She did not answer. She was already almost asleep against his shoulder, the way she used to sleep against his shoulder a long time ago, when they had been two different people in a different apartment on a different street, and the world had felt smaller and simpler and had not yet started teaching them any of its harder lessons. He kissed the top of her head. He held her. Outside, 42 floors below, the city kept moving, slow and wet and ordinary, as cities do after long rains. Somewhere in that city, Marco Battaglia sat on the edge of his daughter's bed and watched her sleep. Somewhere in that city, Regina stood at a stove making tea for herself in a quiet apartment she shared with a cat named Dante, and 3 photographs of a husband she had lost in 1998. Somewhere in that city, in a guest room down the hall, Elena Marchetti sat on the edge of a bed that was not hers and looked at her hands and began, very slowly, to imagine a life that did not, in any part of it, include standing against a wall while somebody else decided what her shoulders meant. Somewhere in that city, Salvatore Falcone sat in the passenger seat of a car and looked out the window at streets he had known for 50 years and understood quietly that he was seeing them for the last time and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. And somewhere, 42 floors above the wet streets, in a penthouse that had, for many years, been a very loud kind of quiet, 2 people who had been married for 16 years slept, for the first time in a long time, in the same bed. It would not be easy, what came next for them. It would take months. It would take years. There would be mornings when Dominic woke up and forgot briefly everything he had learned on that long April day, and Arya would have to remind him, and he would be angry, and she would be tired, and they would fight, and it would be ugly, and they would come back to each other anyway, because coming back to each other was, finally, the habit they had chosen to build. The empire they built, in the years that followed, was not the empire Dominic's father had imagined, or that Dominic himself had imagined at 27. It was smaller in some places and larger in others. It had softer edges. It kept more of its young people alive. It made, over time, a great deal of money, in ways that were legal in more jurisdictions than the old ways had been. And the money lasted because things built on terms. Outlast things built on fear, every time, in every business, without exception. Arya Falcone became, in her 40s and 50s, a person whose name was spoken in certain rooms in certain cities with the particular hush that is reserved for people who have done something very difficult, very well, for a very long time. She never sought credit for any of it. She did not have to. The people who needed to know knew. Dominic Falcone became, in those same years, a man who listened. It did not come naturally. It never did. But he worked at it. He worked at it the way a man works at a language he has started learning too late in life, imperfectly, with an accent, with embarrassment, but steadily, and every year a little better than the year before. He learned the names of his men's wives. He learned the names of their children. He learned, eventually, to come to bed at a reasonable hour and to eat the lamb while it was still warm, and to say the things that had needed saying 9 years too late, but that were, as it turned out, still worth saying. And on the wall of his study, next to the photographs of his father and his father's father, he eventually put up one more photograph, a small one, in a simple silver frame. It was of Carmine, at 6, in a Yankees cap. For a long time, he had not been able to look at it. Then, one day he could. That, in the end, was what Arya had given him. Not the deal. Not the empire. Not even quite the marriage they had rebuilt, although that was the largest part. What she had given him in one long, wet April day was the chance to become a man who could, finally, look at the things he had been unable to look at, and to keep looking at them, and to not look away. It was, He came to understand much later the only kind of power that had ever actually been worth having. And he had very nearly died without knowing that.